On my wedding day, my future mother-in-law pulled me aside and said, "You'll never be good enough for my son." She smirked, thinking I'd back out. But as the wedding march started, I walked down the aisle, with a decision that left everyone in shock. On my wedding day, just moments before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my future mother-in-law pulled me aside. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped my wrist, her polished smile never wavering as she leaned in close. "You'll never be good enough for my son," she whispered, her voice laced with quiet malice. For a second the world around me blurred. The distant sound of the wedding march playing outside, the soft murmurs of guests awaiting my entrance, the floral scent of the extravagant bouquets, it all faded. My chest tightened, but I refused to let her see me falter. Hey everyone! Power moves are made in silence, but victories deserve to be seen. Hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey where strategy, resilience, and unexpected twists shape every story. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Margaret Sinclair, the woman who had spent months pretending to tolerate me, had finally removed her mask. I met her gaze, unflinching, refusing to let her words pierce through my resolve. She smirked as if expecting me to crumble, expecting me to run out of the church humiliated. But she underestimated me. Instead of pulling away, I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that I knew unsettled her. "We'll see about that," I said, my voice steady, my heart hammering with something far more powerful than hurt, determination. She straightened, her eyes narrowing slightly. For the first time she seemed unsure, as if she had miscalculated her own move. But before she could say anything else, the wedding coordinator peeked into the room. "It's time." I turned on my heel and walked toward the double doors, feeling Margaret's eyes burn into my back. Every step down that aisle was a silent declaration. I wasn't leaving. Not today. Not ever. The grand hall was filled with people, all standing as I made my entrance. My dress trailed behind me, the delicate lace shimmering under the golden glow of the chandeliers. I could feel the weight of their gazes, but I focused only on one person, Ethan. He stood at the altar, looking at me with admiration and love, oblivious to the quiet battle that had just taken place. His dark blue eyes softened as I approached, his lips curving into a reassuring smile. I could almost believe that this moment was untouched by the storm brewing around us. As I reached him, he took my hands in his, squeezing gently. "You look breathtaking," he whispered. I smiled, though my mind was elsewhere. Margaret thought she had won. She thought her words would shake me, make me doubt myself. But she had only given me more reason to stay, more reason to fight. The officiant began speaking, his voice a steady rhythm in the background as I locked eyes with the woman seated in the front row. Margaret. She watched me closely, waiting for a misstep, waiting for the moment I would reveal weakness. I would give her none. As the ceremony progressed, my mind whirled with possibilities. Margaret's disdain for me wasn't just a passing dislike. It was a calculated strategy. She had been planting seeds of doubt, whispering into Ethan's ear, trying to turn him against me. I had overheard her once, late at night, telling him that I was after his wealth, that my background wasn't suitable for someone of his status. I had spent months proving myself, showing him that my love was real. He believed me, but I knew his mother still had a hold on him, her influence stretching like invisible threads. As Ethan slid the ring onto my finger, I made a silent promise to myself. This was no longer just a wedding. It was the beginning of something far greater, a game that Margaret didn't realize she had already started. The moment the officiant declared us husband and wife, the applause erupted. Ethan pulled me close, his lips brushing against mine, sealing our vows. The world around us blurred into a haze of celebration, but I remained acutely aware of the woman watching from the sidelines. Margaret Sinclair may have tried to break me, but she had only fueled something much stronger. She had underestimated the wrong woman. As the celebration continued, I played my part flawlessly. I smiled, danced, and accepted congratulations from guests who barely knew me beyond the carefully curated image Margaret had allowed them to see. The grandeur of the reception was undeniable. Golden chandeliers bathed the room in a soft glow, crystal glasses clinked with endless toasts, and waiters carried trays of the finest delicacies. It was a night meant to be unforgettable, yet beneath the surface, something far more sinister simmered. Margaret kept her distance, but her presence was inescapable. She was watching, calculating, waiting for the moment I would falter. But I had no intention of giving her that satisfaction. Every time our eyes met, I made sure to hold her gaze a little longer than necessary, a silent challenge lingering between us. Ethan remained blissfully unaware of the unspoken war taking place in the background. He held me close, whispering affectionate words in my ear, making promises of a future I wasn't sure was entirely in my control. I wanted to believe in us, in the love that had led to this moment, but I knew better. Love alone wouldn't be enough to survive Margaret's machinations. It was only when the final guests had departed, and we returned to the lavish estate Ethan called home, that the illusion began to crack. As I stepped into the master bedroom, still in my wedding gown, I caught sight of an envelope resting on the dresser. My name was scrawled in Margaret's unmistakable handwriting. Curious but wary, I unfolded the letter. The words struck like a blow. By now, you must know this marriage is built on nothing but a fragile illusion. Ethan will always trust me more than he trusts you. And when the time comes, he will choose me. Walk away while you still have dignity left. Or stay and watch everything crumble. My hands tightened around the paper, my pulse thrumming with unspoken fury. She was relentless, but so was I. I would not cower. I would not run. I had already made my choice. The next few weeks should have been blissful. Honeymoon phases were supposed to be filled with romance and happiness, but ours was tainted with Margaret's looming influence. I started noticing small things at first. Ethan hesitating when I brought up financial decisions, his sudden need to double-check with his mother before making choices about our future, and the way his demeanor changed when Margaret's name entered a conversation. Then came the whispers. I overheard them one evening, voices carrying through the slightly ajar office door. She needs to understand her place, Ethan. You've known her for what, a couple of years? I raised you. I know what's best for you. Mom, stop. Lena loves me. This isn't. She loves the life you provide. That's different. I have the documents, Ethan. You don't have to take my word for it. Silence. I pressed my hand against the wall, heart pounding. Documents? What was she talking about? A chair scraped against the hardwood floor, and I quickly moved before I could be caught eavesdropping. Moments later, Ethan emerged, his expression unreadable. He didn't mention the conversation. Instead, he pulled me close, kissing my forehead, but something in his touch felt distant. That night, as he slept beside me, I slipped out of bed and made my way to his office. I had no choice. If Margaret had planted doubts, I needed to know what they were. The desk drawer was locked. Of course it was. But Ethan wasn't the only one with secrets. I had seen where he kept the spare key. With careful movements, I retrieved it and unlocked the drawer, pulling out a neatly stacked file labeled with my name. As I flipped through the pages, my stomach tightened. It was a collection of financial records, old debts from before I met Ethan, twisted narratives making it seem like I had deliberately positioned myself to marry into wealth. Some of it was true. I had struggled, but I had worked hard to rebuild my life. Margaret had taken fragments of my past and crafted a story that painted me as an opportunist. And Ethan had seen this. Had he believed it? The thought sent a cold wave through me. I placed everything back as I had found it and returned to bed, lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. The next morning I waited. I watched Ethan, studied his mannerisms, the way his gaze flickered when I mentioned our future, the slight hesitation when I touched him. Margaret's poison was working. I could feel the shift happening beneath my feet, and I knew if I didn't act soon I would lose everything. But I refused to let Margaret win. The first step was securing my place. I had to make Ethan see me as indispensable, as someone he couldn't function without. So I played my role, the perfect wife, attentive, loving, understanding. I eased his burdens, handled things before he could ask, made myself a necessity in his life. Margaret was waiting for me to lash out, to confront Ethan with anger, to give him a reason to doubt me further. I wouldn't give her that. Instead, I started digging. I spent weeks charming the estate staff, gathering small pieces of information, forming a picture of the secrets Margaret never thought I'd uncover. And then I found it. A transaction buried under layers of business accounts. Money wired from a private account linked to Margaret to a so-called investigator. A name I recognized. The same investigator who had put together the file on me. She hadn't just stumbled upon my past. She had fabricated parts of it. I had proof. But I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. Because Margaret thought she was winning. She thought she was turning Ethan against me, dismantling my place in his life piece by piece. What she didn't realize was that every move she made only gave me more power. So I waited. I let her think she was ahead. And when the time was right, I would make my move. The battle had only just begun. Margaret believed she had the upper hand. She had manipulated Ethan, planted doubts, and twisted my past into a narrative that suited her agenda. But what she failed to realize was that I had already begun my counterattack. I wasn't the same woman she had dismissed as an unworthy outsider. I had patience, intelligence, and above all an unwavering resolve to win this war. Every morning I played the role of the devoted wife. I greeted Ethan with soft kisses, prepared his favorite breakfast, and listened intently as he spoke about his work. I made myself indispensable, ensuring that every moment of his life was woven with my presence. If Margaret wanted to pull him away from me, she would have to work much harder. Yet beneath the surface I was setting my own traps. I had gained the trust of the estate staff, housekeepers, security personnel, even the family lawyer. People talked when they believed you were harmless, and soon enough whispers of Margaret's misdeeds began to reach my ears. I learned of her secret meetings with business associates she swore had been cut off, of financial transactions she had deliberately concealed, and of whispered conversations about Ethan's inheritance. One evening as I walked into the study, I found Ethan hunched over a stack of papers, his expression tense. He didn't notice me at first, too lost in whatever documents lay before him. When he finally looked up, his eyes carried uncertainty. "My mother showed me some things about you," he admitted hesitantly. I feigned confusion. "What kind of things?" "She said you hid your financial struggles from me. That you married me because you saw a way out of your problems." His voice was soft, almost unsure, as if he himself wasn't convinced. I met his gaze, forcing every ounce of emotion into my words. "Ethan, if money was all I cared about, why would I still be here after everything she's done to push me away?" He hesitated, but I could see the battle in his mind. Margaret's words against the truth he had always known about me. "I don't know what to believe," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. That was all I needed. Doubt. If Margaret had planted a seed, I had just started to uproot it. That night while Ethan slept, I made my next move. I had carefully gathered evidence of Margaret's underhanded dealings, and it was time to use it. The documents I had uncovered showed that she had been misusing company funds, redirecting them into private accounts under different names. If this information surfaced at the right moment, it would do more than just tarnish her reputation. It would dismantle her control. Instead of acting rashly, I started small. I leaked pieces of information anonymously to close associates of Ethan's father, the real power players in the family business. Within days, the whispers of Margaret's questionable financial moves had begun circulating. She was still in the dark, unaware that her own game was now turning against her. Meanwhile, I kept Ethan close. I subtly questioned why his mother was so involved in his decisions, why he constantly sought her approval when we were supposed to be building a life together. He began to notice the way she interfered, the way she controlled every aspect of our marriage from the shadows. Then came the dinner party. Margaret had invited an elite circle of associates, her closest allies. She walked through the halls as if she owned the very foundation we stood on. She had no idea that by the end of the night her power would begin to slip. As we sat at the long, polished dining table, laughter and conversation filling the room, I seized my moment. "Margaret, I heard something quite interesting the other day," I said sweetly, watching her carefully. She barely spared me a glance. "Oh, and what might that be?" I was speaking with one of Ethan's father's old business partners. He mentioned an unusual set of transactions linked to Sinclair Enterprises. I took a casual sip of wine, pretending not to notice the way her spine stiffened. The room fell silent. Even Ethan turned to me, his expression unreadable. "I'm sure it was nothing," I added, setting my glass down. "But it did make me wonder, how much do we really know about the company's finances?" Margaret's face remained poised, but I saw the flicker of unease in her eyes. He knew. She knew I had something. After the party, she cornered me in the hallway. "You're playing a dangerous game, Lena," she whispered, her voice controlled but sharp. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Am I?" She exhaled, barely restraining her frustration. "You don't belong here. You never have. And I will not stand by while you manipulate my son." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. The difference between us, Margaret, is that I don't need to manipulate Ethan. He's starting to see you for who you really are. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there for once without a witty retort. From that moment on, the shift was undeniable. Ethan became distant from his mother, his trust in her wavering as he started to question the things she had told him. And Margaret? She was losing her grip. But this wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning of her downfall. Margaret was unraveling, and I could see it in the way her carefully curated mask cracked whenever she thought no one was watching. The once poised matriarch now fumbled through conversations, her sharp words lacking their usual precision. Ethan was beginning to see through her, his trust in her influence eroding with each passing day. But I wasn't satisfied yet. I wanted to ensure she never had the power to hurt me, or Ethan, again. The whispers in high society had grown louder, curiosity turning into suspicion. Margaret's financial dealings had become a topic of hushed conversations at luncheons and social gatherings. I knew this because I had planted the seeds myself. A few calculated remarks to the right people had spread like wildfire, and now, those who once admired her were beginning to keep their distance. Ethan too had started questioning things. His once unwavering loyalty to his mother was shaken, and I took every opportunity to solidify that doubt. I reminded him of the prenup she had orchestrated behind my back, the way she had meddled in our marriage before it even began, and the file of twisted narratives she had presented to him. He listened, though he never outright admitted that he regretted believing her. But I could see it. The guilt lingered in his eyes. One evening as I entered his office, I found him staring at his laptop, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He hesitated before turning the screen towards me. It was an email from the family lawyer. Ethan had been requested to review some irregularities in the company's financial records. "She's been shifting money," he murmured, rubbing his temple. "I don't understand why." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. "She's always been protective of the company," I said carefully. "Maybe she didn't want you to find out." His jaw clenched. "She should have told me." The next day, Ethan arranged a meeting with the board. Margaret had no idea what was coming. When she arrived at the Sinclair Enterprises headquarters, she walked into the conference room with the same confidence she had always carried. She greeted the board members with polite smiles, completely unaware that the very people she had spent years manipulating were about to turn against her. Ethan didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid a folder across the polished table. "Explain this." Margaret's expression didn't falter at first. She opened the file, skimming through the pages, but I saw it. The brief moment of panic that flashed across her face before she quickly masked it. "I don't know what you're insinuating," she said smoothly, closing the folder as if the contents were insignificant. Ethan leaned forward. "I'm insinuating that you've been moving company funds into private accounts. Accounts that don't belong to Sinclair Enterprises." A hush fell over the room. Margaret laughed, though it sounded hollow. "Ethan, darling, you're misunderstanding." "I'm not," he interrupted. His voice was firm, unyielding. "The evidence is all here. Transactions traced back to accounts under your name. This isn't a misunderstanding, Mother. This is deception." For the first time, Margaret looked uncertain. She glanced around the room, realizing that the people she once controlled were no longer on her side. I remained silent, watching her squirm, knowing that this was only the beginning. "I did it for the company," she finally said, her voice quieter. "To protect our legacy." Ethan exhaled sharply. "No, you did it for yourself." The board members exchanged wary glances, waiting to see how this would play out. Margaret had been a powerful force in the company for years, but now her influence was slipping through her fingers. Ethan took a deep breath as if making a final decision. "You need to step down." The words were like a slap. Margaret's composure wavered, her lips parting as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "I am," Ethan said firmly. "This is the best way to avoid a public scandal. Resign and we'll keep this matter private." Margaret looked at me then, her gaze sharp and accusing as if she knew I had orchestrated this. Maybe she was right. But it didn't matter anymore. She had lost. Days later, the news was announced discreetly. Margaret Sinclair was stepping down from Sinclair Enterprises due to personal reasons. The official statement painted it as a peaceful transition, but behind closed doors she was livid. "You think you've won," she spat at me one evening when we were alone. I tilted my head, offering her a small smile. "Haven't I?" She clenched her fists, but there was nothing left for her to do. Her power had been dismantled piece by piece, her influence reduced to nothing more than fading whispers. Ethan, now fully aware of his mother's true nature, had distanced himself. The once unbreakable bond between them was now strained, possibly beyond repair. And I had secured my place. But Margaret wasn't the type to disappear quietly. I knew she would try to strike back. The only question was, how? Margaret may have been forced out of Sinclair Enterprises, but she wasn't finished. The resignation had been public, but her bitterness was private, festering in the shadows. I could feel her hatred in the way she avoided my gaze at social events, in the tense silence whenever we were in the same room. She had lost the battle, but she wasn't the kind of woman to accept defeat easily. I wasn't naive. I knew she would strike back. It was only a matter of time. For weeks things were quiet. Too quiet. Ethan and I settled into a routine, one that no longer revolved around his mother's presence. He still spoke to her occasionally, but the conversations were short, tense. He was beginning to understand that she had controlled his life for too long, that her influence had been more suffocating than supportive. It was a shift I had worked hard for, and I wasn't about to let her undo it. Then the rumors started. It began subtly, a hushed conversation that ended abruptly when I walked into the room, a curious glance exchanged between guests at a charity gala. Whispers that I was hearing but not quite understanding. I knew Margaret was behind it before I even had proof. She was planting something meant to discredit me, to turn Ethan against me in the same way I had turned him against her. One evening Ethan came home looking troubled. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, his expression unreadable. "There's something I need to ask you," he said, his voice measured. I set down the book I had been pretending to read and met his gaze. "What is it?" He hesitated. "Someone told me, they said you've been meeting with my business rivals. That you've been passing information." A slow, cold anger spread through me. Margaret was playing dirty. I exhaled, forcing calm into my voice. "And do you believe them?" He shook his head immediately. "No. But I need to know why people are saying this." I stood, closing the distance between us. "Because your mother is desperate, Ethan. She's trying to destroy me the way she tried to destroy us. And if you let her, she'll win." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I don't want to believe she'd go this far." I took his hand, squeezing it gently. "She already has." He sighed, nodding slowly. "Then we need to end this." The word sent a thrill through me. He had said we. Not I. Not you. We. The next morning I put my final plan into motion. Margaret had underestimated how far I was willing to go to secure my place. She had thought I was merely playing defense, but she was wrong. I had been building my offensive strategy all along. I reached out to an old acquaintance, someone Margaret had crossed in her ruthless climb to the top. A former investor she had betrayed years ago, leaving him humiliated and financially ruined. He still carried a grudge, and I knew he would be eager for payback. Within days, whispers turned into accusations. The same circles that once feared Margaret now whispered about her dealings. The evidence I had been collecting, her financial misdeeds, her manipulations, her attempts to frame me, was carefully leaked to the right people. Then the final blow. At an exclusive fundraising event, Margaret arrived in her finest designer gown, smiling as if she still held power in a world that had begun to turn against her. She didn't know that, behind the scenes, her fate had already been sealed. The moment came when a journalist approached her, microphone in hand. "Mrs. Sinclair, there have been allegations about financial misconduct in Sinclair Enterprises. Do you have a comment?" The color drained from her face. She composed herself quickly, her smile tightening. "I have no idea what you're talking about." The journalist pressed on. "Multiple sources claim that money was moved through hidden accounts. And there are also rumors that you attempted to sabotage your own daughter-in-law by spreading false information. Would you like to address that?" Margaret's carefully constructed image shattered. I watched from across the room, sipping my champagne as the realization dawned on her. She wasn't untouchable anymore. Over the next few weeks she lost everything. The remaining board members at Sinclair Enterprises distanced themselves, her social circle shrank, and soon, even the invitations to exclusive events stopped coming. Margaret Sinclair was no longer a force to be reckoned with, she was an outcast. Ethan and I never spoke of her downfall in detail, but he knew. He knew I had orchestrated it, even if he never asked how. And I knew he didn't want to know. One afternoon I found a letter slipped under our front door. No name, but I didn't need one. You won this round. But don't ever forget, victory comes with a price. And I will be watching. I smiled, folding the letter carefully. He could watch all she wanted. But she would never rise again. I held the letter between my fingers, my grip tightening slightly as I reread the words. You won this round. But don't ever forget, victory comes with a price. And I will be watching. Margaret's handwriting was as elegant as ever, her message laced with a quiet menace that barely hid the bitterness beneath. I folded the letter, tucking it away in my desk drawer, but I didn't throw it out. It wasn't fear that made me keep it, it was curiosity. A reminder that despite her downfall, Margaret Sinclair wasn't a woman who simply faded into obscurity. She would try again. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. Weeks passed and life returned to something that resembled normalcy. Margaret had been erased from high society. Invitations that once arrived at her doorstep were now being sent to me instead. Those who had once whispered in her ear now sought my approval. Ethan had fully distanced himself, and though I knew there was still a lingering ache in him for the mother he had idolized for so long, he never spoke of her again. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit study, sipping tea while reviewing some documents for a charity I had recently taken over, one that used to be Margaret's pet project, my phone vibrated. A message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. Did you really think it would be that easy? My lips curved slightly. I should have expected this. Margaret had been quiet for too long, and silence had never been her nature. She had lost her throne, but she hadn't disappeared. And now she was making her first move. I didn't reply. Instead, I placed my phone down, exhaling slowly. She wanted me to react, to feel a flicker of unease, to believe that she still had control. But she was mistaken. I had spent too long carefully dismantling her power, ensuring that every advantage she once held had crumbled beneath her feet. There was nothing left for her to cling to, or so I thought. The first sign that she was still dangerous came a few days later. Ethan received a call from one of his company's board members. They wanted to discuss a sensitive matter. When he returned home that evening, his face was unreadable. She's trying to get back in, he said finally, setting his phone down on the marble counter. I feigned surprise. How? She's been reaching out to investors, trying to regain some influence. She's claiming she was forced out unfairly. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Some of them are listening. I nodded slowly, hiding the flicker of amusement beneath my composed expression. Margaret was playing a predictable game. She had nothing tangible left, so she was attempting to manipulate the narrative, turning herself into the victim. Do you think she has any real leverage? I asked carefully. Ethan hesitated. Not legally. But perception matters. If she convinces the right people that she was wronged, she could make things difficult. I set my teacup down gently. Then we make sure she doesn't. Ethan glanced at me, his brow furrowing slightly. Lena, what exactly did you do? I smiled. Nothing I can't handle. I spent the next week making quiet moves, ensuring that anyone considering siding with Margaret thought twice. I met with the investors she had reached out to, subtly reminding them of the chaos she had caused in Sinclair Enterprises, the instability she had brought. I didn't need to threaten anyone. I simply let the truth speak for itself. And when that wasn't enough, I used the final piece of leverage I had been saving. There was something Margaret had hidden even from Ethan. An old misstep, something buried deep enough that she had convinced herself it would never surface. A business dealing gone wrong, one that had nearly resulted in a public scandal years ago. She had paid to make it disappear, but money couldn't erase the past completely. With a carefully placed tip to the right journalist, whispers turned into headlines. Margaret Sinclair, the once unshakable force, was now under scrutiny. The investors who had considered aligning with her quickly backed away, not wanting to be associated with someone whose reputation was now tainted beyond repair. She had nothing left. The final time I saw her was at a charity gala. A public event that she had once dominated, now reduced to nothing more than an outsider looking in. She wasn't there as a guest but as a shadow watching from the edges of the room, unnoticed by most. But I noticed her. As I walked past, I paused just long enough to meet her gaze. She didn't speak. Neither did I. He didn't have to. We both knew this was the end of the game. That night, as I stood on the balcony overlooking the city, Ethan joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "It's over, isn't it?" he murmured against my hair. I leaned back against him, gazing at the skyline. "Yes," I said softly. "It's over." Margaret had spent years ruling from the top, believing she was untouchable. But in the end, it wasn't rage or direct confrontation that had undone her. It was patience. Precision. A carefully played game that she had never realized she was losing until it was too late. I had won. And I never had to lift a single weapon to do it. His secretary sent me a bikini selfie with the caption, "He likes red." He laughed it off, saying it was nothing. "He's always had a thing for redheads," he smirked. I smiled, invited her to dinner, and served them both a taste of what happens when he underestimates me. It was a Thursday afternoon when the message arrived. From an unknown number. Just an image. The notification pinged while I was preparing dinner. Jason's favorite pasta primavera. My hands were covered in flour from the homemade dough I was rolling out, a skill I'd perfected over our 7 years of marriage. I wiped my hands on my apron and reached for my phone, expecting a delivery confirmation for the anniversary gift I'd ordered. Instead, there she was. Julia, his secretary, posing poolside in a red bikini captioned, "He likes red." I stared at it for exactly 5 seconds. Not out of shock, but because I had expected something like this. The image burned into my retinas. Her copper hair cascading over tan shoulders, that calculated smile, the bikini that matched the shade of lipstick she wore to the office Christmas party. The one where Jason had disappeared for 20 minutes. My kitchen suddenly felt too warm. The pasta machine gleamed accusingly under the pendant lights we'd picked together during our kitchen renovation last spring. I set my phone face down on the marble countertop, the screen still illuminated with her image. Jason had become increasingly distant. Late work nights, fewer shared dinners, constant screen time. The signs had been accumulating like dust in forgotten corners. Last month he'd missed our standing Thursday date night for the 3rd time, claiming budget meetings ran late. I'd called his office at 9 p.m. and no one answered. When he finally came home that night, his collar smelled of unfamiliar perfume. Something floral and aggressive. Not the subtle scent I'd worn for years because he once mentioned he liked it. I finished the pasta anyway, mechanically forming perfect ribbons. I heard his key in the door at 6:30, surprisingly punctual. His footsteps hesitated in the hallway, followed by the rustle of his suit jacket being hung in the closet. I slid my phone into my pocket just as he entered. "Something smells amazing," he said, loosening his tie, the blue one I'd given him for his promotion. He kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture that barely grazed my skin. We ate dinner with the evening news humming in the background. I waited until he'd finished his second glass of wine before sliding my phone across the table, the image still displayed. "This came today," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "From an unknown number." Jason's eyes widened momentarily before he composed himself. He picked up the phone, his expression shifting from surprise to practiced nonchalance. When I showed him the picture, he laughed. "She's just being playful. You know how she is." Then the smirk. "I've always had a thing for redheads." The statement hung between us like a visible thread, one I could follow back through our entire relationship, connecting moments I'd previously dismissed. Julia wasn't the first. There had been Amber from accounting 3 years ago, whose auburn hair had caught his attention at company functions. Before her, Chelsea, the yoga instructor whose strawberry blonde curls bounced as she demonstrated poses. I'd been too trusting, too willing to believe his explanations. I didn't argue. I just smiled, tucked it away, and began observing more closely. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his even breathing. The moonlight filtered through our bedroom blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the bedspread. I slid out of bed at 2 a.m. and padded to his home office. His laptop sat on the desk, closed but not locked. He'd grown careless, confident in my complacency. Julia was new but not shy. She'd started at the firm just 4 months ago. Fresh out of business school, Ambitious and 27, 11 years younger than me. She often texted him outside work hours. I'd seen the names, the emojis. Heart eyes, flames, private jokes I wasn't privy to. I opened his laptop, and his emails appeared without requiring a password. He'd stopped hiding things, assuming I wouldn't look. Scrolling through his calendar, I found lunch meetings with her name attached, blocks of time labeled J project discussion, that corresponded to evenings he'd come home late. I wasn't interested in confrontation. I was interested in clarity. The next morning I suggested we combine our phone plans to save money. He agreed without hesitation. Another mistake. I set up the new account with access to message histories going back 3 months. That night after he fell asleep I downloaded everything. So I backed up messages. Noticed gift charges on our shared card. Business dinners labeled vaguely as client entertainment at restaurants I knew were intimate, with secluded booths and dim lighting. A hotel charge from when he claimed to be at a conference in Phoenix. Receipts for jewelry I'd never received. My silence wasn't weakness, it was setup. I created a dedicated email account and forwarded everything there. I installed a discreet tracking app on his phone during breakfast one morning while he showered. I contacted a lawyer friend for preliminary advice, careful to speak in hypotheticals. While Jason believed he'd gotten away with subtle infidelity, I was building a timeline. Each piece of evidence was a stepping stone toward my own liberation. The weight of betrayal transformed into purposeful action. I was done being underestimated. Done being the understanding wife who looked the other way. Done pretending not to notice the lingering glances between them in our own home when she dropped off urgent documents on Sundays. 2 weeks after receiving the bikini photo, I had enough evidence to destroy both their careers. Misappropriation of company funds. Falsified expense reports. Time theft. The affair was just the salacious cherry on top. I decided to host a dinner, one they wouldn't forget. As I sent the invitation to Julia from my personal account, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I opened my closet and pushed aside the neutral colors Jason preferred me in. At the back hung a dress I'd purchased years ago but never worn, crimson, bold, unapologetic. I slipped it on, the silk cool against my skin. In the mirror I barely recognized myself. Not because of the dress but because of the woman wearing it. Someone who had found strength in silence and strategy and patience. Red had never been my color before. But perhaps it was time to claim it. I sent Julia a message from my own number this time. Let's do dinner. Just us girls. No pressure. The text felt oddly liberating. Sending words I'd rehearsed a dozen times while staring at my bathroom mirror, practicing the casual indifference I needed to convey. 3 dots appeared immediately. She was typing, then stopping, then typing again. I imagined her surprise, perhaps consulting with Jason about how to respond. Finally, after 2 minutes that stretched like taffy, her reply came fast. That sounds fun. I've always wanted to get to know you better. The audacity almost made me laugh. I wondered if she practiced that line or if such betrayal came naturally to her. Perhaps she truly believed I was oblivious, the clueless wife too comfortable in domestic routines to notice the signs. Or worse, she thought I knew but accepted my role as the convenient spouse who maintained the home while she provided the excitement. I spent the morning researching restaurants, somewhere neither Jason nor his colleagues would frequent. Somewhere with the right atmosphere for what I had planned. Not too intimate, suggesting friendship. Not too formal, implying confrontation. I reserved a quiet booth at an elegant restaurant downtown called Ophelia's. Private enough for conversation. Public enough for accountability. The maitre d' assured me the booth would be in the back corner. Perfect for catch-ups, he'd said with practiced charm. That afternoon I visited our home printer. The soft mechanical hum as it worked felt like a countdown. I printed a copy of our shared credit card statement. Marked items that didn't align with Jason's claimed activities. A $430 dinner at Lumiere when he'd told me he was working late with the team on sandwiches. A $290 spa charge on a Saturday he'd supposedly spent golfing. A jewelry store purchase 3 days before Julia's birthday. I highlighted each item in yellow. Added sticky notes with his written explanations, text messages claiming whereabouts. The contrast between evidence and alibi created its own narrative, one even a stranger could follow. I also brought a folder of screenshots. Casual flirtations, inside jokes, hotel confirmations, all with timestamps. I'd been thorough, organizing everything chronologically. The progression told its own story, from professional boundaries to blurred lines to explicit arrangements. One particularly damning exchange discussed my scheduled dentist appointment as perfect timing for them. The manila folder felt surprisingly light for the weight of its contents. I slipped it into a leather portfolio, the one Jason had given me for my promotion 3 years ago, back when he still celebrated my successes instead of competing with them. At home, I stood before my closet, considering my wardrobe choices carefully. The red dress caught my eye again, but tonight wasn't about making statements. Tonight was about being underestimated one final time. The night of dinner, I dressed in muted tones, a gray silk blouse and charcoal pencil skirt that whispered restraint and professionalism. Pearl earrings my mother had given me. A light touch of makeup that highlighted nothing in particular. I wanted to be forgettable, a blank canvas against which her choices would stand in sharp relief. I arrived 15 minutes early, settled into the booth and ordered sparkling water. My hands remained steady as I arranged the portfolio on the seat beside me, angled so it wouldn't be immediately visible. The restaurant hummed with Thursday evening energy. Business dinners, friends catching up, couples on dates. Normal people with normal lives, unaware of the small demolition about to take place in the corner booth. At exactly 7:30 she appeared at the entrance. The maitre d' pointed her in my direction and I watched her approach. She arrived in red, a fitted dress with a neckline that dipped just low enough to be noticed but not commented on. The exact shade of the bikini from the photo, which couldn't be coincidence. Her copper hair fell in waves around her shoulders, catching the dim lighting of the restaurant. Julia hugged me like an old friend, her perfume leaving a cloud between us. "This is so nice of you," she said, her voice honey-warm and practiced. "I was so excited when I got your message." She slid into the booth across from me, arranging herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being watched. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, which darted around as if searching for hidden motives or possibly Jason himself. The server approached and I ordered wine without consulting the list. "The Cabernet Sauvignon," I said. "2 glasses." "Red?" She joked with a theatrical lilt, as if we were already sharing some delightful inside understanding. I smiled. Of course. The word hung between us, an acknowledgement of her caption, her dress, her assumption that she had the upper hand in this choreographed dance. We exchanged pleasantries about the restaurant, the unseasonably warm weather, and upcoming company event. She mentioned Jason twice in the first 5 minutes, casual references designed to establish her proximity to him. I nodded, asked appropriate follow-up questions, and watched her grow increasingly comfortable with her performance. The wine arrived, deep crimson in crystal glasses. We clinked a toast to new friendships, and I took a small sip while she drank more deeply. Once drinks arrived, I slid the folder toward her, maintaining eye contact as I did. "What's this?" she asked, cheerful, her perfectly manicured fingers reaching for it as if expecting a gift or perhaps photographs I wanted to share. "Just everything you've worked for," I replied calmly. The double meaning wasn't lost on me, but her confident smile suggested it was lost on her. Her smile remained frozen in place as she opened the portfolio, but it faltered as she flipped through pages. Her face drained of color, the contrast making her red lipstick appear garish rather than glamorous. She swallowed hard, her throat working visibly. "This isn't what it looks like," she muttered, her voice suddenly small in the intimate space between us. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I said. "And now it's documented." She closed the folder quickly as if containing a fire. Her eyes darted around the restaurant, perhaps checking if anyone had noticed her reaction. The performance had shattered, leaving raw uncertainty in its place. "I don't understand why you're showing me this," she whispered, her composed facade cracking like thin ice. I took another small sip of wine, letting the moment stretch between us. The power had shifted. I could feel it in the air, see it in the slight tremor of her hands as she pushed the folder back toward me. "I thought it was important that we understand each other," I said finally, "before we discuss next steps." I let her sit with the discomfort, flipping page by page, until she reached the dinner receipt labeled Client Entertainment. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together as recognition dawned. A $347 meal at Nouvelle, a restaurant known for its intimate atmosphere and extensive wine list. A place where Jason had taken me for our 5th anniversary. You used the company card, I said. That makes this more than personal. It makes it professional misconduct. The legal implications seemed to hit her harder than the personal ones. Her shoulders tensed beneath the red fabric of her dress. The confidence that had carried her into the restaurant evaporated like morning dew under harsh sunlight. She blinked fast, mascara clumping slightly at the corners. I didn't know, Jason said. Jason said a lot. I interrupted, my voice level and controlled. And now it's your turn to listen. I took a small notebook from my purse, leather-bound, monogrammed, a gift from my father when I graduated law school. I hadn't practiced in years, choosing instead to support Jason's career while I worked in corporate compliance. The irony wasn't lost on me. I've spoken with legal counsel, I said, opening the notebook to a page with bullet points. Here are your options. The restaurant's ambient noise provided perfect cover. Just loud enough that anyone passing wouldn't catch our conversation, just quiet enough that she could hear every carefully chosen word. I laid out the options. Submit a resignation, sign a statement acknowledging misconduct, and leave quietly. You have until Monday morning, I added, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. This contains the statement. You'll notice it doesn't mention the affair, only the financial improprieties. Her fingers trembled as she took the envelope, nails scraping against the thick paper. The red polish matched her dress, matched the wine still untouched in her glass. If you don't, I forward this to HR and legal, along with the expense reports. The folder remained open between us, displaying a hotel receipt from the peninsula, a weekend when Jason had claimed to be at a regional management retreat. The date circled in yellow highlighter seemed to pulse on the page. They'll fire both of you, I continued. And given the company's ethics clause, there will be no severance. Her red lipstick was now smeared, her voice barely above a whisper. The perfect image she'd cultivated was dissolving around her, like a painting left in rain. You wouldn't. She started, but the words lacked conviction. Her eyes darted to the evidence before her, then back to my face, searching for any sign of bluff or hesitation. I would. And I will. Unless you choose the easier exit. She took a shaky breath. I could tell Jason. Warn him. I smiled slightly. You could. But then the full dossier goes to the board tomorrow morning instead of just HR. That includes the texts where you both discussed how to hide the expenses. I turned to a specific page in the folder. This one, where you suggested using the Sydney project as cover for the weekend getaway, is particularly problematic given the budget allocations. Her carefully constructed defenses crumbled. The manipulation, the secret smiles, the confident ownership of my husband's attention. All of it replaced by the stark reality of professional consequences. She nodded slowly, a tear tracking through her foundation. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I sipped my wine, allowing the rich flavor to fill my mouth before swallowing. Intent doesn't erase consequence. The rest of our dinner passed in near silence. She barely touched her entree when it arrived, pushing salmon around her plate while avoiding my eyes. I ate methodically, tasting nothing but the satisfaction of control reclaimed. When the check came, I paid with my personal card. A final legitimate business expense, I remarked. She flinched. Before leaving, she paused. What about Jason? That's between my husband and me, I replied, emphasizing the word husband ever so slightly. I watched her walk away, shoulders hunched, the confident stride gone. The red dress that had been meant as a statement now seemed like a beacon of vulnerability, drawing eyes to her hasty retreat. After she left, I ordered another glass of wine. The server noticed my dining companions barely touched food. Was everything all right with her meal? She lost her appetite, I replied. Life surprises us sometimes. I sat alone in the booth, feeling neither triumph nor despair, only the quiet certainty of necessary action. On my phone, I composed a message to Jason. Hope you're hungry. We'll talk at dinner. The drive home felt longer than usual, streetlights casting intermittent shadows across the dashboard. I caught glimpses of my reflection in the rearview mirror, a woman I was just beginning to recognize again. At home, I changed into comfortable clothes and began preparing a meal. I cooked his favorite, pasta carbonara, the dish I'd made the night we got engaged. Something comforting, familiar. The final courtesy before demolition. I heard his key in the lock at 8:45. Later than usual but earlier than his recent pattern. Perhaps Julia had already called him, voice trembling with warnings and accusations. Perhaps not. He entered the kitchen cautiously, senses alert like prey detecting a predator's presence. "Something smells amazing," he offered, the words hollow echoes of our normal routine. "Just finished," I replied, sliding a plate toward him. "Would you open wine? The Burlo would pair well." He moved to the wine cabinet, selecting the bottle I'd suggested, a gift from his boss last Christmas. As he poured wine into crystal glasses, wedding gifts from his parents, I reached for my own portfolio. Identical to the one I'd shown Julia, but with additional documents. As he poured wine, I handed him his copy of the folder. The weight of it surprised him. He nearly spilled the deep red liquid onto our counter. He froze, recognition immediate. "Where did you get this?" "From our home," I said. "Where you left everything." His face performed a complex dance of emotions. Surprise, fear, calculation, and finally, a practiced contrition I'd seen before. When he'd missed anniversaries, forgotten commitments, prioritized everything above our marriage. "Let's sit," I suggested, gesturing toward the dining table I'd set with our everyday dishes. "Your food will get cold." Jason tried to recover. His fork hovered above the untouched pasta as he shifted strategies. I'd seen this expression before. When negotiating with clients, when convincing his boss to increase his department's budget. The practiced sincerity that had won him awards and promotions. It didn't mean anything. "You know I love you." The words fell between us like stones into still water. 7 years of marriage reduced to the most predictable line in the script of infidelity. I wondered how many women before me had heard those exact words, arranged in that exact order, delivered with that exact earnest gaze. I said nothing, just handed him Julia's signed resignation and written statement. She'd texted me earlier, a photograph of the signed documents. Her handwriting had been shaky but legible, the confession of a woman who understood she'd gambled and lost. He scanned the pages, disbelief washing over his features. "This is from today? You've already spoken to her." "We had dinner at Ophelia's. She wore red." His eyes narrowed, darting from the documents to my face. The calculation behind them was almost audible, assessing damage, searching for leverage, weighing options. "You set us up," he accused, voice rising with indignation that sounded almost genuine. "No. I invited her to dinner." I took a bite of pasta, chewing slowly. The carbonara was perfect. Creamy, rich, comforting. I wanted to remember this meal, this moment of reclaimed power. "She made her choices. So did you." His anger deflated, replaced by something more pragmatic. He'd always been practical, even in crisis. It was what made him successful in business, and apparently in conducting an affair under his wife's nose. He realized what had happened. The pieces assembled in his mind, revealing the chess game I'd been playing while he thought we were still at checkers. So what now? The question hung between us. This was the moment I'd rehearsed in my mind for weeks. Not with anger or tears or accusations, but with clarity and precision. "You'll sleep in the guest room. And we'll begin separating accounts." The finality in my voice surprised even me. Something tensed in his jaw, a flicker of the man I'd once believed him to be, fighting to preserve what he suddenly realized was valuable only now that it was slipping away. "Is this it?" he asked. His voice had softened, vulnerability seeping through the cracks of his composure. I considered the question. Was it? 7 years of building a life together. Vacations in coastal towns, Sunday mornings with coffee and crosswords, plans for children we'd never quite gotten around to having. The countless small moments that had threaded together to form our shared existence. "This is the shift," I answered. "The end is up to you." He didn't touch his food again that night. I heard him in the guest bedroom pacing, making phone calls in hushed tones. Probably to his brother, maybe to a lawyer. I slept deeply for the first time in months. Over the next few weeks, I moved with methodical purpose. I separated our finances, updated my legal documents, and scheduled appointments with a divorce attorney. Not out of spite but out of necessity, creating clear boundaries where trust had collapsed. One Tuesday morning, I requested a meeting with Marissa Levine, the company's chief operations officer. We'd worked together on several projects and she'd always respected my attention to detail. Over the next few weeks, I met with HR myself. The meeting lasted exactly 45 minutes. I presented the evidence clinically without emotional commentary. The financial improprieties were the focus. Company funds misused for personal indulgences. The affair was merely contextual. I laid out Jason's misconduct and Julia's resignation, my voice steady as I highlighted specific expenses and dates. Marissa's expression remained professional, but I caught the moment of realization when she connected certain absences with specific reports that had been delayed. "You've been very thorough," she noted, closing the folder. "And discreet." "I value the company's reputation," I replied. "And my own." The company launched a quiet inquiry, ultimately resulting in Jason's demotion. He was removed from the executive track and reassigned to a regional management position. Still respectable, but without the influence or visibility he'd cultivated so carefully. In a development that surprised everyone except Marissa, I secured a promotion to lead a procurement division, a role I'd quietly supported for years behind the scenes. My background in compliance made me the logical choice for restructuring a department that had operated too long without proper oversight. When the announcement went out, Jason sent me a text. "Congratulations. Was this your plan all along?" I didn't respond. There had been no master plan, only the natural consequence of removing obstacles and allowing my competence to be seen clearly. In our home, we developed a careful choreography of avoidance. Jason collected his belongings gradually, moving most to the guest room, some to a storage unit he thought I didn't know about. We communicated through notes left on the kitchen counter, texts about practical matters, emails copied to our respective attorneys. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. Those were weapons of the insecure, and I had moved beyond the need for emotional warfare. I just documented, presented, and moved forward. The divorce proceedings progressed with the same methodical care I'd applied to uncovering the affair. Our mediation sessions were models of civility that left our lawyers almost disappointed. Jason stayed on at the company, but his reputation never recovered. The whispers followed him through hallways into meetings across the cafeteria. Not because I had spread rumors, I never discussed what had happened, but because absence of explanation creates its own narrative. Around the office, eyes no longer followed him, they followed me. Not with pity or curiosity, but with a new respect. I had transformed from Jason's wife who works in compliance to Elizabeth, the procurement director who restructured vendor relationships and saved the company millions. 6 months after that dinner at Ophelia's, I passed Jason in the hallway. He'd lost weight, his suits hanging slightly loose at the shoulders. He nodded politely, professional courtesy intact. "You look well," he said, an observation rather than a compliment. "I am well," I replied. And for the first time in years, it wasn't a performance. At the next corporate event, I wore red, not out of irony but power. The annual leadership summit gathered executives from all regional offices, a showcase of achievement and strategic vision. My dress was simple but impeccable, crimson silk that fell just below the knee, with a neckline that suggested confidence rather than attention-seeking. The color that once belonged to Julia now belonged to me, reclaimed like everything else she had borrowed. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel buzzed with conversation and calculated networking. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with white orchids and silver candelabras. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and surveyed the room, noting the subtle shifts in dynamics since last year's event. Jason arrived alone. Julia had vanished from everyone's contacts. Her LinkedIn profile now listed a position with a smaller firm in Denver. The whispers about her departure had faded into corporate mythology, the kind of cautionary tale shared during happy hours but never in official settings. Marissa approached, elegant in charcoal gray. "Your presentation materials are loaded and ready," she said. "We've adjusted the schedule to give you 20 minutes instead of 15. The board members specifically requested more detail on the compliance framework." I nodded, touching the small portfolio containing my speaking notes. "I appreciate the additional time." The agenda had been arranged to position my presentation as the centerpiece of the morning session. A year ago, I would have been seated at a side table, introduced as Jason Mitchell's wife who works in compliance. Tonight, Jason was the footnote, present but peripheral. At precisely 10:15, I took the podium. The room quieted, attention focusing forward. I surveyed the faces. Some curious, some impressed, some still evaluating my worth in this new position. At the back, near a decorative column, stood Jason, drink in hand, expression carefully neutral. I gave a presentation on ethical leadership and corporate integrity. My voice carried confidently through the room as I outlined the new procurement protocols that had already saved the company $4.3 million in the first quarter. I discussed transparency in expense reporting, the implementation of tiered approval systems, and the ethical framework guiding vendor relationships. Integrity isn't just about following rules, I concluded, my gaze sweeping across the room, pausing fractionally on Jason. It's about creating systems where doing the right thing is the easiest path forward. There were no fireworks, just applause and nods. No dramatic confrontations or public reckonings, just the quiet assertion of competence and the subtle realignment of influence. As attendees moved toward breakout sessions, I collected congratulations with gracious smiles. The CEO touched my elbow briefly. Your procurement overhaul is exactly what we needed. The board is impressed. Jason lingered by the bar watching. He knew. The expensive scotch in his hand, his third of the evening, betrayed the casual pose he attempted to maintain. When our eyes met across the room, he raised his glass slightly, not quite a toast, more an acknowledgement of a game well played. I didn't approach him. We had said all that needed saying through lawyers and mediators. The following Tuesday my lawyer called. The judge signed off this morning, she said. It's official. My lawyer finalized the divorce agreement with a fair settlement, prenup intact. The document arrived via courier that afternoon in a heavy manila envelope. I signed for it during a lunch break, between meetings with the Asian market expansion team and a vendor contract renewal. The end of our marriage was marked by signatures on dotted lines, not tearful goodbyes or bitter arguments. The prenuptial agreement I'd insisted upon, against Jason's protests that it showed lack of faith, had protected my inheritance and the investments I'd made before our marriage. Jason kept his company shares and the vacation property in Maine. I retained the city apartment and my family's lake house. I didn't destroy Jason. I simply revealed him. His career continued, though the trajectory had been irrevocably altered. Last month he'd been passed over for the regional director position he'd been positioning himself for over the past 2 years. Not because I had intervened, but because his judgment had been called into question. I didn't need revenge to be loud. I needed it to be lasting. The quiet dignity with which I'd handled everything, from discovery to divorce, had earned me respect that shouting never could. The systems I'd implemented at work would long outlast any satisfaction screaming might have provided. Julia never contacted me again. She changed jobs, reportedly moved cities. According to common connections on professional networks, she had reinvented herself in corporate training, specializing in communication strategy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't chase. I didn't care. Her part in my story had been incidental, a catalyst rather than a central character. Whatever life she built now existed entirely separate from mine, relevant only as a distant echo of a transformation I'd undergone. In my newly reorganized home office, I methodically updated files and documents. I updated my life one file at a time. Finances, passwords, power of attorney. My emergency contacts no longer included Jason's name. My beneficiaries were changed to my sister's children and selected charities. My living will now designated my brother as medical proxy. With each amended document and revised designation I felt lighter. These weren't just administrative tasks. They were declarations of independence, affirmations that my life continued on paths of my own choosing. And with each step I gained more than I lost. What had appeared as catastrophic betrayal had transformed into unexpected liberation. The carefully constructed facade of a perfect marriage had hidden the truth that I had been playing a supporting role in my own life. One evening as I prepared for a business trip to Singapore, my first international assignment leading the procurement team's global standardization project, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Saw your promotion announcement. Congratulations. You always were the smarter one. J. I read it once, then deleted it without replying. The validation I might once have craved from him now seemed irrelevant. A postscript rather than a conclusion. In my suitcase, carefully packed between silk blouses and tailored slacks, lay a new dress. Red, of course. Not because it reminded me of him or her or what had happened, but because it reminded me of myself, the woman who had finally stepped fully into her power. Some would call it poetic justice. I simply called it living. Today red is still my color, but not for seduction, for strength. The Singapore trip marked the beginning of my global role, one that took me through Tokyo, London, Berlin, and eventually to our new headquarters in Chicago. In each city I added to my collection. A scarlet cashmere scarf from a small shop in Kensington, ruby earrings from an artisan in Kyoto, a crimson leather portfolio from a craftsman in Milan. Small tokens that carried the weight of reclamation. 3 years have passed since that dinner at Ophelia's. 3 years of building, refining, and expanding my vision, both professionally and personally. The promotion to Vice President of Global Operations came last quarter, announced with little fanfare but significant impact. My team spans 7 countries and 3 continents. My decisions affect thousands. My home is quiet, my office decorated in clean, intentional lines. The apartment I kept in the divorce has been transformed, every trace of Jason's presence methodically replaced. Gone are the hunting prints he insisted complemented the living room. In their place hang abstract canvases in shades of blue and copper. The oversized leather furniture that dominated the space has been exchanged for sleek, modern pieces that better suit my taste. My office features a single wall of deep red, not an accident or an obsession but a reminder. Visitors comment on its boldness. They don't know its history. This morning I stood before the bathroom mirror, applying lipstick before a board presentation. I see myself in the mirror and no longer flinch at what I tolerated. The woman reflected back has sharper edges, clearer eyes, a more certain set to her jaw. She recognizes her worth without external validation. She knows the difference between compromise and surrender. Last week I received an email from Jason, his first direct communication in over a year. He's engaged to someone new, a marketing executive from the Dallas office. He wanted to tell me himself, out of respect. I replied with a single line, "I wish you both well." And I meant it. His choices no longer have the power to wound me. My story isn't about betrayal, it's about redefinition. The narrative I once believed, of being the supportive wife whose identity existed primarily in relation to her husband's success, has been rewritten. The betrayal was merely the plot twist that revealed a more compelling protagonist had been waiting in the wings all along. I didn't lose a husband. I lost the illusion of one. The partner I believed Jason to be had never truly existed. Or perhaps had existed briefly before ambition and opportunity eroded his principles. The marriage I mourned was a construction built on selective perception and willful ignorance of warning signs. And in doing so I gained peace, control, and presence. The freedom to make decisions without consideration of his preferences. The ability to travel without checking someone else's schedule. The luxury of decorating without compromise. The simple joy of eating whatever I want for dinner. Watching whatever film catches my interest, sleeping diagonally across the bed if I choose. Dating has been an exercise in recalibration. I've had dinner with interesting men. A literature professor whose observations about Greek tragedy made me laugh. A widowed architect whose quiet understanding of space extended to emotional boundaries as well. None have moved beyond pleasant evenings and respectful goodbyes. I'm not closed to possibility, but neither am I searching to fill a vacancy that doesn't exist. I still pass couples in restaurants. Sometimes I catch a glance or an awkward smile. Occasionally I recognize the look. A woman watching her partner's attention drift, making excuses for absences, choosing silence over confrontation. I see the moment of recognition in her eyes when our gazes meet. The flash of awareness that she's being handed a map but isn't ready to follow it. I hope she's watching. Not me specifically but the signs surrounding her. The password changes, the unexplained expenses, the conversations that end abruptly when she enters a room. I hope she's collecting evidence, not just of potential infidelity, but of her own worth beyond the relationship. I hope she doesn't wait too long to stand up. Not necessarily to leave but to establish boundaries, to require respect, to expect honesty. To understand that accommodation without reciprocity isn't partnership, it's erasure. And if she does, I hope she wears red too. Not literally, perhaps, but figuratively. I hope she chooses visibility over invisibility, assertion over acquiescence, action over acceptance. I hope she finds the shade that represents her reclaimed power, whatever color that might be. Because there's power in being underestimated. And greater power in the comeback. The quieter the transformation, the more profound its impact. My colleagues who dismissed me as Jason's wife now report to me. The executives who barely acknowledged my presence now seek my approval. Last month, at an industry conference, I delivered the keynote address on integrating ethical practices into global supply chains. Afterward, during the reception, I noticed a young woman approaching. Early 30s, sharp suit, determined expression. "Your presentation was incredible," she said, extending her hand. "But I really wanted to thank you for something else." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. 3 years ago, I worked in accounting at the regional office. I saw how you handled everything with. She hesitated, with such precision and dignity. It showed me what professionalism truly means. I wasn't just the wife. I was the wake-up call. Not just for Jason and Julia, but for those watching from the periphery. The junior staff, the administrative assistants, the colleagues who witnessed how strength can manifest in calm calculation rather than emotional outbursts. And when they laughed, I simply waited. When Jason joked about Julia's playful message, when Julia hugged me with false friendship, when they believed their clever duplicity would continue unchecked. I didn't rush to reaction. I didn't give them the satisfaction of my distress. I observed, documented, and planned. Until it was my turn to serve the main course. The meal that changed everything. A carefully prepared dish of consequences, presented with elegant restraint. Now, as I prepare for another day of leading rather than following, I catch a final glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The red blazer I've chosen for today's board meeting isn't a statement or a reminder. It's simply a color that suits me. One among many I might have selected. Red was never her color anyway. It was always mine. I just needed the right moment to claim it. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when she confronted Julia at the restaurant with that folder of evidence and watched the color drain from her face. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. "I sold your worthless land to protect my son's future," my mother-in-law hissed, her diamond rings glinting in the dim study. "You're just a gold digger who lucked into an inheritance." I smiled, knowing the worthless land hid her late husband's secret vault, and the tape of her sabotaging his brakes. "Your husband is dead." 4 words. That's all it took to collapse my world. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering against the kitchen tile as Officer Redmond's voice continued from the speaker, now distant and muffled. Something about black ice. About Marco's car veering off Riverside Drive. About him being pronounced dead at the scene. I don't remember screaming. The neighbor said I did. Mrs. Patterson from next door found me crumpled on the floor, still in my paint-splattered overalls from the nursery I'd been setting up. Marco and I had just found out we were having a boy. Just 3 days before. He'd kissed me goodbye that morning, his hand lingering on my still flat stomach. "I'll pick up that blue paint on my way home," he'd promised. The paint cans were still sitting in his trunk when they pulled his body from the wreckage. The funeral was a blur of black suits and hushed whispers. I stood numb beside the polished mahogany casket, accepting condolences from faces I barely recognized. Marco's colleagues from the architectural firm. Distant cousins I'd only seen in wedding photos. Old college friends who'd driven hours to be there. But it was Camille who commanded the room. Marco's stepmother moved through the funeral home like she was hosting a charity gala, her black designer dress impeccably tailored, diamond earrings catching the light as she tilted her head in practiced sympathy. "Such a tragedy," she kept saying, her hand briefly touching shoulders before moving on. "He was like a true son to me." The lie of it burned in my throat. Marco had never been a son to her. He'd been an inconvenience, a reminder of her husband's first marriage, a threat to her claim on the Sullivan fortune. I'd seen how she looked at him when she thought no one was watching, with calculation, not affection. When she finally approached me, her perfume preceded her, something expensive and suffocating. "Jocelyn, dear," she murmured, taking my hands in her cold, bony ones. Her diamond rings pressed painfully into my skin. "You'll need to be strong now." I noticed she didn't cry. Not a single tear for the man she claimed to have raised as her own. "We should discuss the house," she continued, lowering her voice. And Marco's affairs. Perhaps next week when you're feeling more composed. I pulled my hands away. His lawyer will contact you, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Everything's going to me and the baby. Something flashed behind her eyes, anger quickly masked. Of course, dear. I'm only trying to help. That night, alone in my bed, I clutched Marco's pillow and finally let myself break. I cried until my throat was raw, until my eyes burned, until the pillow no longer smelled like him. In the darkness, I remembered how excited he'd been about the property his father had left him. 40 acres of rolling Pennsylvania woodland where 3 generations of Sullivans had spent their summers. We'll build right here, he'd said on our last visit, standing on a sunlit hill overlooking a natural clearing. He'd spread architectural drawings across the hood of our car. His designs for our dream home. Wraparound porch, big windows facing the sunrise. The kids can grow up with space to run. Marco had loved that land in a way Camille never understood. To her, property was only valuable if it could be leveraged or sold. To Marco, it was heritage, connection, future. 3 days after the funeral, I found Camille in Marco's home office, rifling through his desk drawers. What are you doing? I demanded from the doorway, startling her. She straightened, smoothing her silk blouse. Just looking for some family photos, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. For the memorial slideshow. The lie was so transparent it made me sick. The photos are in the living room albums. You know that. Well, she sighed, closing the drawer with a decisive click. While I'm here, we should discuss Richard's watch. Richard, Marco's father. The man whose death 5 years ago had left Camille wealthy and Marco orphaned for the second time, having lost his mother to cancer when he was just 8. What about it? I asked, though I already knew. It's a family heirloom, she said, her voice taking on the condescending tone she reserved for me. It should stay with family. Marco was family. And now he's gone, she said with such finality that something cold slithered down my spine. The watch belongs with me. I found it later, hidden in Marco's sock drawer. An old Patek Philippe that had belonged to his grandfather first. I slipped it into my pocket along with the deed to the Pennsylvania property. Something in Camille's expression had triggered an instinct. Protect what Marco valued. A week later, I met with Tyler, Marco's childhood friend, at a coffee shop downtown. We'd grown close over the years of my marriage, sharing a protective love for Marco who was too trusting, too generous for his own good. The police report said black ice. I told him, cradling my decaf as if it could warm the perpetual chill I'd felt since that phone call. But it was 50 degrees that night, Tyler. There was no ice. Tyler stirred his coffee slowly, his expression troubled. Have you talked to Camille since the funeral? She wanted Richard's watch. And she was searching Marco's office. He nodded, unsurprised. She's worried about what Marco might have found. My heart stuttered. Found. Tyler leaned forward, lowering his voice. Marco never told you this, but he was suspicious about his dad's accident. The brake lines were cut, but it was ruled mechanical failure. Cut. The word came out as a whisper. He couldn't prove anything, but he thought Camille might have been involved. He started looking into his dad's old business records, especially relating to that property. Apparently, there's something about that land that Camille desperately wants. Why didn't he tell me? He wanted proof first. Didn't want to worry you. Tyler's eyes flickered to my stomach. Especially after you got pregnant. As I drove home, my hands shook on the steering wheel. Marco's accident suddenly felt too convenient, too similar to his father's. Was it possible? Had Camille orchestrated both deaths? The phone rang as I walked through the door. It was Camille, her voice syrupy sweet. Jocelyn, dear, I've been thinking. That property is just going to be a burden for you now. Why don't I help you sell it? I know some interested buyers. The seemingly innocent offer chilled me to the bone. I'll think about it, I lied, my free hand protectively covering my stomach where Marco's son grew. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed menacing. For the first time since Marco's death, my grief was eclipsed by something else. Determination. If Camille had something to do with Marco's death, if there was something on that property worth killing for, I was going to find out what it was. For Marco. For our child. For justice. 3 days later, the mail carrier delivered a certified letter requiring my signature. The return address belonged to Bradford and Sons Legal Associates, a firm I'd never heard of. My fingers trembled as I tore open the heavy cream envelope, the official letterhead swimming before my eyes as I read. This letter serves as formal notification that the property located at 145 Oak Ridge Lane, Westbrook County, Pennsylvania, has been sold by Camille Sullivan, executor of the Richard Sullivan estate. My coffee mug shattered against the kitchen floor. The property, Marco's beloved land, sold? The letter continued with legal jargon about closing dates and final inspections, but one thing was clear. Camille had somehow managed to sell land that wasn't hers to sell. Land that legally belonged to Marco and now to me and our unborn child. I called our family attorney immediately, my voice breaking as I explained the situation. "That's impossible," Howard Brennan said, his usually calm voice rising. "She has no authority. Richards will explicitly left that property to Marco." I drew up the paperwork myself. The letter says she acted as executor. She was executor of Richards' estate, yes, but that role ended years ago when all assets were distributed. She's filed false documents. Don't worry, Jocelyn. This won't stand. But worry was all I could do. That land was more than property. It was Marco's legacy, our future, our son's birthright. And now some stranger was preparing to take possession. I drove to Camille's house in the affluent Lakeview district, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sprawling Tudor-style mansion had always intimidated me, with its manicured hedges and security cameras discreetly positioned at the gates. Today, I didn't bother announcing myself through the intercom. I used the family code Marco had given me years ago, a code Camille probably thought I didn't know. Her housekeeper, Elena, looked startled when I burst through the front door. "Mrs. Sullivan, is Camille home?" "In her study, but she has a meeting in." I didn't wait for her to finish. The study was at the back of the house, a wood-paneled room that had once belonged to Richard. Camille had redecorated after his death, replacing his comfortable leather chairs with delicate antiques that no one was actually meant to sit in. She looked up from her desk when I entered, her reading glasses perched on her nose, surprise quickly morphing into annoyance. "Jocelyn, I wasn't expecting you. I'm rather busy." I slapped the letter onto her desk. "You sold Marco's land." A flicker of something, guilt? Irritation, crossed her features before her expression settled into practiced neutrality. The property was becoming a liability. Property taxes, upkeep. I made an executive decision. "It wasn't yours to sell." "Of course it was." She removed her glasses, folding them deliberately. "There was a codicil to Richard's will. The property reverted to me if it remained undeveloped for 5 years. Marco knew this." "That's a lie." My voice shook with fury. "Marco would have told me." Camille stood, circling her desk to close the study door. When she turned back to me, the polite mask had vanished. Her eyes were cold, calculating. "You know what I think?" she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I think Marco didn't tell you a lot of things. Like the fact that his father's company was nearly bankrupt when he died. Or that I was the one who saved it, who turned it around while Marco was off playing with his little drawings. Architecture," I corrected automatically. "He was an architect, not a..." "He was a spoiled child who never grew up," she snapped. "Always expecting handouts, living off his father's name. And you?" Her gaze flicked dismissively over my simple clothing, settling briefly on my stomach. "You're just a gold digger who lucked into an inheritance." The words hit like a physical blow. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred, a cold, clarifying anger. "That land belonged to Marco," I said steadily. "And now it belongs to me and our son." "Not anymore." She smiled, her diamond rings glinting as she gestured to the letter. "It's done, Jocelyn. The sale is final. We'll see about that." The next day, I drove to Westbrook County, the rural Pennsylvania township where the property was located. The local law firms were small operations, their offices often sharing space with insurance agents or real estate brokers. I found Matthew Jenkins through a recommendation from the county clerk, a middle-aged attorney whose modest office belied his reputation as a tenacious property rights advocate. "These documents are irregular," he said, examining the copies Howard had faxed over. "For one thing, this codicil she mentioned isn't referenced in the original will. And these transfer documents, The timing is suspicious. What do you mean? They were filed just 3 days after your husband's death. He frowned, tapping his pen against the desk, almost as if she'd prepared them in advance. The implication made my blood run cold. What can we do? File an injunction to halt the sale for starters. And I want to see the county records, check when this supposed codicil was actually registered. As I left Jenkins' office, I noticed a silver Range Rover with Connecticut plates parked outside the coffee shop across the street. Something about it tickled my memory. Hadn't the letter mentioned the buyer was from Greenwich? On impulse, I entered the shop and ordered a chamomile tea. The man at the corner table was in his 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the casual confidence of old money. When he answered his phone, I heard him mention the Sullivan property, and felt my heart race. I approached his table after he hung up. "Excuse me, are you by any chance Gordon Whitley?" He looked surprised. "Yes, do we know each other?" "No, but I believe you're buying property from Camille Sullivan." "I'm Jocelyn Sullivan, her stepson's widow." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "Oh, yes. Well, it's a beautiful piece of land. My wife and I plan to build a summer home." "I'm sure Camille gave you a good price," I probed gently. "Exceptionally good," he agreed readily. "Nearly 30% below market. Said she needed a quick, quiet sale." He paused, studying my expression. "Is there something I should know?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Jenkins. "Codicil registered 2 weeks ago. Backdated. We have her." I excused myself, promising Whitley I'd be in touch, my mind already racing. 2 weeks ago, while Marco was still alive. Had she been planning this all along? Was this connected to his death? That evening I drove out to the property one last time. The sale hadn't closed yet and technically the land was still in dispute. I used the old key to the gate, following the dirt access road to the clearing Marco had loved. Dusk was settling over the hills as I approached the small caretaker's cottage, the only structure on the property. We'd used it for weekend stays while Marco worked on his designs. Now I wanted to collect his drafting materials and the family photos we'd left there. As I moved through the cottage with my flashlight, something felt off. The layout seemed different. The back wall of the storage closet had always been solid concrete, but now there was a seam running down its center as if concealing a door. I pressed against it, feeling it give slightly beneath my fingertips. My heart pounded as I examined the edges more carefully, finding a nearly invisible latch mechanism disguised as a circuit breaker. With trembling fingers I flipped it open. The wall slid aside with a whisper of hydraulics, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Marco's voice seemed to echo in my memory. "Dad always said this property was special. That it held the past and the future of the Sullivan family." I hadn't understood then. But as I stood at the threshold of this hidden passage, my flashlight beam disappearing into the darkness below, I began to realize what Camille might be so desperate to possess, and what secrets might lie beneath this worthless land. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I descended the narrow concrete stairs. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying the earthy scent of undisturbed soil mingled with something metallic. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat echoing the same thought. Marco never knew about this. At the bottom I faced a heavy steel door with a keypad lock. I tried Marco's birthday, then Richard's. Nothing. My hand instinctively touched my stomach as I typed in the due date of our baby. The date Marco had programmed into both our phones the day we learned I was pregnant. The lock clicked open. Inside lay a room roughly the size of our living room, walls lined with metal shelving units filled with cardboard boxes, each labeled meticulously by year. A large desk dominated the center, topped with an ancient computer and stacks of folders. The space felt frozen in time, a perfect preservation of Richard Sullivan's private world. I began with the boxes from 5 years ago, the year of Richard's death. Inside I found newspaper clippings about Sullivan construction, project blueprints, and financial records far more detailed than anything that had been shared with Marco after his father died. One folder contained articles about government contracts from the 1980s, with photographs of Richard shaking hands with military officials. The headlines mentioned specialized security installations and classified infrastructure projects. The next morning I drove back to Westbrook and visited the local historical society. The elderly volunteer, Mrs. Winters, seemed delighted by my interest in Sullivan construction. "Oh, Richard Sullivan was quite the mysterious figure around here," she said, pulling out bound volumes of the county newspaper. "His company built most of the important structures in the county, but it was his government work that got people talking." Government work? Cold War era. Fallout shelters mostly. But rumors said he built secret installations for the military too. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Some folks claimed he built a network of bunkers beneath half the county, all connected underground. Probably just tales, but Richard never confirmed or denied anything." As she continued searching through archives, I noticed a photograph on the wall. A groundbreaking ceremony for the county courthouse. Among the officials stood a younger Richard Sullivan, and beside him, a man I recognized instantly. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing. "Oh, that's Frank Miller. He was Richard's right-hand man for 30 years. Still lives out on Cedar Creek Road. Keeps to himself these days." An hour later, I pulled into the driveway of a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town. A weathered man in his 70s eyed me suspiciously from the porch until I introduced myself. "Marco's wife." His weathered face softened immediately. Come in. Terrible about Marco. Just terrible." Frank Miller's living room was cluttered with memorabilia from construction projects. Photographs, hard hats, even a bronze trowel mounted on the wall. He served coffee in mismatched mugs, his hands still strong despite their arthritis. "I was the caretaker for that property after I retired from active construction," he explained. "Richard wanted someone he trusted keeping an eye on things." "Did you know about the bunker beneath the cottage?" His coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. "He showed it to you." "I found it by accident." "What is it, exactly?" Frank set his mug down carefully. "Richard built it in '83 during the height of the Reagan defense buildup. Officially it was a private fallout shelter. Unofficially," he sighed, "Richard kept things there he didn't want anyone to find. Not even his wife. Especially not his wife," I guessed. Frank's eyes met mine. "Richard married Camille when Marco was 12. Beautiful woman, 20 years his junior. We all knew what she was after, but Richard was besotted. Wouldn't hear a word against her. But he still built a secret vault she knew nothing about. Richard wasn't a fool, just in love. He documented everything." Frank leaned forward. "If you found the outer chamber, you should know there's more. A second level." My breath caught. "How do I access it?" "The bust of Benjamin Franklin on the desk. Turn it clockwise, then press the base. That's where Richard kept his most sensitive materials." That night, I returned to the property, parking my car half a mile away and approaching on foot. The property was technically in legal limbo due to Jenkins' injunction, but I couldn't risk being caught trespassing if Whitley decided to visit his future purchase. The cottage stood silent against the night sky. I slipped inside, my flashlight beam bouncing off the walls as I made my way to the hidden entrance. The bunker felt even more ominous in the dead of night, the steel door groaning as it swung open. Inside, I went straight to the desk and found the small bronze bust of Franklin. It turned easily, revealing a button in its base. When I pressed it, a section of flooring beside the desk slid open, revealing another staircase. The lower level was smaller but more sophisticated, a concrete room humming with aging electronics. One wall held surveillance monitors, now dark and dead. Another was lined with filing cabinets. But it was the massive safe in the corner that drew my attention. A commercial-grade vault with a combination lock. Frank had given me the combination. Marco's birthday, followed by the latitude and longitude coordinates of the property. The heavy door swung open, revealing stacks of documents, flash drives, and a metal lockbox. Inside the lockbox, I found bundles of cash, passports in different names with Richard's photo, and at the very bottom, an old dictaphone with a cassette tape still inside. The label made my blood freeze. Camille, Brake Lines, October 17, 18. The date of Richard's fatal car accident. My hands trembled as I searched for something to play the tape on. In a drawer beneath the surveillance equipment, I found an old tape player. I connected it to a power source, inserted the cassette, and pressed play. At first, there was only static, then a woman's voice, unmistakably Camille's, emerged through the crackling audio. "It has to look accidental, you understand? Richard takes that mountain road every Wednesday. The brake lines need to be cut just enough that they'll fail on the sharp turns, but not before he's well away from town. A man's gruff voice responded, "This is going to cost you extra. This kind of job. Money is no object. Once I'm a widow there will be plenty to go around. Just make sure it's clean. And remember, if this ever comes back to me, I have nothing to lose by taking you down with me." The tape continued with details of payment and timing. My stomach churned as I listened to Camille methodically plan her husband's murder. When the recording ended, I sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of what I'd discovered washing over me. Camille hadn't just manipulated her way into Richard's fortune, she'd orchestrated his death. And now, with the same cold calculation, she'd arranged for Marco's accident, and was erasing all evidence of her crimes by selling the one place that held proof of her guilt. As I carefully packed the tape and most damning documents into my bag, a new determination hardened within me. This wasn't just about reclaiming Marco's land anymore. It was about justice. For Richard, for Marco, and for our unborn son who would never know his father. Camille Sullivan was about to discover that she'd underestimated the wrong widow. Dawn was breaking as I drove home, the evidence safely tucked in my bag, my mind racing with possibilities and dangers. The recording was damning, but would it be enough? Audio technology from 5 years ago could be challenged in court. I needed more. A comprehensive case that would leave no room for Camille to slither away from justice. After a few hours of fitful sleep, I began systematically going through the documents I'd taken from the vault. Financial statements revealed discrepancies in Sullivan Construction's accounts following Richard's death. Large sums transferred to offshore accounts. Project funds mysteriously depleted. Clients billed for work never completed. Camille had been systematically bleeding the company dry while maintaining a facade of prosperity. One folder contained handwritten notes from Richard, dated just weeks before his death. See accessing restricted files. Changed all passwords. Must confront. Another note, dated 3 days before his accident. Meeting with lawyer tomorrow. Changing will and company structure. He had known. Richard had discovered Camille's betrayal and was planning to cut her off. His death hadn't just been convenient. It had been necessary for her survival. I needed someone who could authenticate the tape, someone who understood digital forensics but could also be trusted completely. Marco had often mentioned his cousin Alex, who had distanced himself from the family years ago after a falling out with Camille. He now ran a cybersecurity firm in Boston. Finding his contact information proved challenging. Camille had systematically erased him from family records. Eventually, I tracked him down through an old college alumni directory. His response to my email was immediate. "Meet me at Westfield Cafe tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone." Alex Sullivan looked nothing like Marco. Where my husband had been tall and broad-shouldered, Alex was compact and wiry, with restless energy that manifested in constantly moving hands. But they shared the same penetrating gaze, the same ability to focus completely on whoever was speaking. "I always knew she was poison," he said after I'd explained everything, his voice low and intense. "Uncle Richard was smart, successful, but blind when it came to her. What exactly do you have?" I showed him copies of the financial documents and played a short clip of the recording on my phone. His face darkened. "That's definitely her voice. I'd recognize that cold, calculating tone anywhere." He paused, fingers drumming on the table. "But you need more than just authentication. You need chain of custody, proof these weren't tampered with." "I can help with that." Alex explained he would need to work with the original tape and documents, using specialized equipment to verify their authenticity and age. "We can create digital fingerprints that prove when they were created and that they haven't been altered. It's the same technology used in high-profile legal cases." As we finalized plans, Alex hesitated, then reached into his messenger bag. "There's something else you should know. Marco contacted me about 3 months ago. He was suspicious about his father's death and wanted my help investigating Camille." My heart stopped. "What?" He handed me a sealed envelope. "He sent me this about 2 weeks before his accident with instructions to give it to you if anything happened to him. I've been trying to find the right time." With trembling fingers I opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a letter in Marco's familiar handwriting. "My darling Jocelyn, if you're reading this, my suspicions about Camille were correct. I've been secretly investigating Dad's accident. The attached files contain everything I've found so far. financial records showing embezzlement, communications with offshore accounts, and testimony from a mechanic who believes Dad's brake lines were deliberately damaged. I plan to confront Camille with this evidence next month, after securing our future. I've taken precautions, but if something happens to me, please take this to Detective James Reeves at the State Police. He's an old friend and will handle this discreetly. Know that I love you and our child more than anything. Whatever happens, stay safe. Forever yours, Margaret. Tears blurred my vision as Alex gently took my hand. He was careful but not careful enough. The week before his accident, he told me he thought someone had broken into your house while you were both at work. I remembered coming home that day to find picture frames slightly askew, books rearranged on shelves. Small inconsistencies I'd attributed to my pregnancy brain. She must have found something that tipped her off, Alex continued. And then, she arranged his accident, I finished, cold fury replacing my grief. Just like she did with Richard. Over the next 2 weeks, Alex and I built our case methodically. He authenticated the recording using techniques that would stand up in court, while I organized the financial evidence into a clear narrative of fraud spanning 5 years. We discovered that Marco had been quietly documenting Camille's embezzlement from company accounts, likely what had signed his death warrant when she discovered his investigation. Detective Reeves, a stoic man with compassionate eyes, listened carefully to our evidence but warned us about proceeding. This is circumstantial, he explained. Damning, yes, but a good lawyer could create reasonable doubt. If we move too soon, she'll slip away and destroy whatever evidence remains. We need more, preferably a confession. She'll never confess, I said bitterly. Everyone confesses when they believe they're untouchable, Reeves replied. The key is making her feel safe enough to talk freely. That night I lay awake formulating a plan. Camille's greatest weakness was her pride, her absolute confidence in her superior intelligence. She believed she'd already won, that I was just a grieving widow too broken to fight back. That perception was my most powerful weapon. We need to make her believe she's successfully intimidated me, I told Alex the next day. That I'm willing to sign away my rights to everything in exchange for being left alone. She won't believe that, Alex objected. You're too stubborn, too much of a fighter. She will if she thinks I'm protecting the baby, I countered, my hand instinctively moving to my growing belly. Maternal fear is something even Camille would understand. The strategy took shape. I would approach Camille, seemingly defeated, offering to relinquish all claims to Marco's estate and the Pennsylvania property in exchange for a modest settlement that would allow me to move away and raise my child in peace. The meeting would take place at her house, where Detective Reeves would ensure surveillance equipment was in place to capture any incriminating statements. It's risky, Reeves warned. If she suspects anything. She won't, I said with conviction. Camille sees exactly what she expects to see. A grieving, frightened young woman who's in over her head. She's never actually seen me as a threat, which is precisely why this will work. As I drove home that evening, I felt Marco's presence beside me, almost as if he were guiding this plan from beyond. The evidence was gathered, the strategy set, the players in position. All that remained was to give Camille enough rope to hang herself. I touched the small recorder Alex had provided, already sewn into the lining of my purse. You were right to be suspicious, Marco, I whispered to the empty car. And she was wrong to underestimate how far I'd go to protect our family. 2 days later, I stood on Camille's doorstep, wearing a loose-fitting maternity dress that emphasized my pregnancy, hair deliberately unstyled, eyes rimmed with red from the eye drops Alex had provided. I needed to look defeated, vulnerable. Exactly what Camille would expect from a grieving widow finally broken by circumstances beyond her control. Elena's surprise was evident when she opened the door. Mrs. Sullivan, we weren't expecting you. I need to speak with Camille, I said, my voice deliberately shaky. Please. It's important. Camille was in the sunroom, dressed impeccably as always, reviewing documents with her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up with thinly veiled annoyance when I entered. Jocelyn. This is unexpected. I want this to end, I said simply, sinking into the chair across from her, one hand protectively cradling my belly. All of it, the legal battles, the accusations. I don't have the strength anymore. A flicker of satisfaction crossed her features before she composed her expression into one of practiced concern. I understand this has been difficult for you, dear. Grief can be so disorienting. I'm willing to sign whatever you want, I continued, eyes downcast. For the land, Marco's shares in the company, everything. I just need enough to start over somewhere quiet for the baby's sake. That's very sensible of you, she murmured, setting aside her papers. I've always said you were a practical girl, despite your emotional attachment to that property. The recorder in my purse was capturing every word, but I needed more than just a settlement discussion. I needed her to reveal her true nature. I've been thinking about what you said, I ventured, about me being a gold digger. Maybe you were right. Maybe I did see Marco as my ticket to security. The words tasted like poison, but I forced them out. But you understand that better than anyone, don't you? Marrying into comfort, into privilege. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That's a rather bold comparison. Is it? You were 26 when you married a wealthy man 30 years your senior. I was 24 when I married Marco. We both saw opportunities and took them. Her lips thinned into a tight smile. The difference, my dear, is that I was smart enough to secure my position. Richard may have been besotted, but I made myself indispensable. You, on the other hand. She gestured dismissively at my pregnant form. You relied solely on sentimentality and biology. And look where that got me, I said bitterly. A widow at 27 fighting a losing battle against someone who's always 3 steps ahead. I leaned forward, injecting admiration into my voice. How did you do it? Turn everything to your advantage so perfectly? Pride, her fatal flaw. Camille couldn't resist the opportunity to showcase her superior intellect, especially to someone she considered beneath her. Planning, my dear. Meticulous planning. She removed her glasses, setting them aside with deliberate precision. Richard was a brilliant businessman but an utter fool in personal matters. He actually believed I married him for love. Her laugh was cold, brittle. When I realized he was becoming suspicious about certain financial adjustments, well, arrangements had to be made. My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. The car accident. Accidents can be so unpredictable, she said with a small smile. Unless they're carefully orchestrated. And Marco? Another accident. She studied me for a long moment, then apparently decided I posed no threat. Like father, like son. He was becoming too curious about his father's financial records. Some people simply can't leave well enough alone. My nails dug into my palms, but I maintained my facade of defeated curiosity. The land, what's so special about it? Why were you so desperate to sell it? Insurance, she said simply. Richard was paranoid, kept evidence of all his dealings and mine hidden away somewhere. I never found his secret storage, but I knew it had to be on that property. Selling it quickly, getting it bulldozed for new construction, was the safest option. And now we come to an arrangement. Her tone became businesslike. I'm hosting the annual Sullivan Construction Gala next weekend. My retirement announcement. After 20 successful years, I'm selling the company to our competitors at a very handsome profit. Attend the gala, sign the papers I'll have prepared, and I'll grant you a generous settlement. Enough for you and your child to disappear somewhere pleasant. Does that sound amenable? I nodded, eyes downcast to hide the fury burning within. I'll be there. The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparation. Detective Reeves arranged for an official investigation based on the evidence we'd gathered. Alex worked with the forensics team to prepare the recordings for presentation. Matthew Jenkins secured a court order halting any construction on the Pennsylvania property. On the night of the gala, I arrived at the Sullivan mansion wearing a simple black maternity dress, hair swept up elegantly, Marco's mother's pearls around my neck. To anyone watching, I looked like a widow paying respects to her husband's family legacy. Only I knew the small clutch in my hands contained a thumb drive with copies of all our evidence. Camille greeted me with artificial warmth, guiding me through the crowd of business associates, family friends, and local dignitaries. Everyone's so pleased you decided to join us, she murmured. Such a lovely gesture of family unity. At precisely 9 o'clock, Camille tapped her champagne glass for attention and began her practice speech about her years building Sullivan Construction, her dedication to Richard's vision, and her difficult decision to retire and sell the company. And now, she concluded with a benevolent smile, I'd like to welcome my dear daughter-in-law, Jocelyn, who has graciously agreed to support this transition during her difficult time. The polite applause as I approached the small podium masked the sound of the main doors opening to admit Detective Reeves and 2 uniformed officers. Thank you, Camille, I began, my voice steady. Family legacy is indeed important, which is why I can't allow Sullivan Construction, my husband's birthright and my child's future, to be sold based on fraud, embezzlement, and murder. The room went utterly silent. What is this nonsense? Camille hissed, reaching for the microphone. Perhaps we should all listen to Richard Sullivan himself, I said clearly, nodding to Alex at the back of the room. The lights dimmed and a projector illuminated the wall behind me. Richard's face appeared. A video recording from the bunker, dated 1 week before his death. If anyone is watching this, I'm likely dead at the hands of my wife, Camille. Richard's recorded voice echoed through the stunned room. I've discovered she's been systematically embezzling from our company accounts and has established offshore holdings in preparation for leaving me. When confronted, she threatened me. I fear for my safety and have therefore compiled this evidence. Camille lunged toward the projection equipment, only to be intercepted by Detective Reeves. Camille Sullivan, you're under arrest for the murders of Richard Sullivan and Marco Sullivan, as well as multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. This is absurd, she shrieked, her perfectly controlled facade crumbling. She's the fraud. A manipulative gold digger who's fabricated all of this. Actually, came a voice from the crowd, she didn't fabricate anything. Gordon Whitley, the property buyer, stepped forward. When Mrs. Sullivan approached me with concerns about the property sale, I began my own investigation. As a former prosecutor, something felt wrong about the urgency and the below-market price. I've been cooperating with Detective Reeves for weeks, recording all my interactions with Camille. Another voice joined in, Elena, Camille's housekeeper. I also provided evidence. I overheard Mrs. Camille on the phone the day before Mr. Marco's accident, discussing brake lines and payment terms. I was afraid to come forward until now. As Camille was led away, still protesting her innocence, the shocked guests began to disperse. I found myself surrounded by Marco's distant relatives, old family friends, all expressing their horror at what Camille had done and their support for me and my unborn child. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, I stood on the hillside of the Pennsylvania property, now legally returned to me, watching as construction crews broke ground on the house Marco had designed. My son, Richard Marco Sullivan, slept peacefully in his carrier beside me. Camille had been sentenced to life without parole for the murders of Richard and Marco. Sullivan Construction was being restructured under the guidance of Alex, who had discovered a passion for the family business once Camille's toxic influence was removed. The property's secret bunker had been properly documented by authorities, its contents providing closure for many of Richard's old business associates who had also suffered from Camille's manipulation. At my request, the bunker itself would be preserved, a testament to Richard's foresight and Marco's courage in pursuing the truth. As I watched the foundation being poured for our home, the home Marco had dreamed of, I felt his presence beside me, his hand symbolically on my shoulder. The house would be exactly as he'd designed it. Wraparound porch, big windows facing the sunrise, room for our son to grow. We did it, Marco, I whispered to the spring breeze. We reclaimed your legacy. And I promise our son will know everything about his father. Your kindness, your vision, your bravery. The worthless land that Camille had been so desperate to sell had ultimately been her undoing. And now, it would be the foundation of the future Marco had envisioned. A place where truth was valued, justice prevailed, and love endured beyond death itself. My husband's ex-wife accidentally showed up at our vacation resort. What a coincidence! She exclaimed. That night, I found their meeting schedule hidden in his wallet. At breakfast, I announced I'd upgraded my vacation by checking into a different resort and filing for divorce. I need an aspirin. The words slipped from my lips before I could stop them, but Charles didn't stir. His breathing remained deep and even as I slid out of our king-sized bed at the Malibu Coast Resort. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 12:17 a.m. in harsh red numbers. I patted across the plush carpet to where his pants were draped carelessly over a chair. I'd spent 6 months planning this trip. Every excursion, every dinner reservation, Every sunset walk along the shore calculated to reignite what had been slowly dying between us for years. The Malibu Coast Resort wasn't just exclusive. It was legendary for its privacy and luxury, a place where celebrities and billionaires disappeared to reconnect or recover. For us, it represented 15 years of marriage worth salvaging. The headache had started during dinner, right around the time she walked in. My husband's first wife. My fingers found Charles's wallet in his back pocket. I flipped it open, searching for the small pill case he sometimes carried. Instead, I found a folded piece of paper tucked behind his credit cards. I shouldn't have opened it. Some part of me already knew. 12 hours earlier, we'd been standing at the check-in desk, Charles's hand resting possessively on the small of my back as I gazed up at the soaring lobby ceiling with its magnificent chandelier that caught and fractured the California sunlight. "Mrs. and Mr. Harrington, welcome to Malibu Coast Resort," the concierge had said, her smile practiced but warm. "We've prepared the oceanfront suite as requested with the champagne and roses." I'd squeezed Charles's hand, catching a rare genuine smile on his face. "The oceanfront suite has the best sunrise view on the property," I'd told him. "You'll actually want to wake up early for once." "For you, Eleanor," he'd said, brushing his lips against my temple, "I'd watch 1,000 sunrises." Such pretty words. I'd believed him then. Our suite had exceeded even my meticulously researched expectations. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Pacific stretching to the horizon, waves crashing against the private strip of beach below. A bottle of Dom Perignon chilled in an ice bucket beside a platter of chocolate-covered strawberries. "This is perfect," Charles had whispered, wrapping his arms around me from behind as we stood on the balcony. "You've thought of everything." I'd leaned back against him, savoring the moment. "Happy anniversary. Here's to 15 more years." The welcome dinner had been in the resort's signature restaurant. Candlelit tables spaced for privacy, the soft murmur of conversation beneath classical music, and windows that framed the sunset like living art. I'd worn the midnight blue dress Charles had always loved, my hair swept up to expose my neck. He'd been attentive, charming, the man I'd fallen in love with years ago. Until she walked in. Rebecca had aged well, her blonde hair now expertly highlighted, her figure as slim as when they'd been married. She'd spotted us immediately, her surprise so perfectly calibrated it might have been rehearsed. "Charles? Eleanor? What an incredible coincidence." She'd approached our table, champagne glass in hand, wearing a dress that whispered money and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'd watched Charles's face carefully. The momentary flicker in his eyes before his features arranged themselves into appropriate surprise told me everything. "Rebecca," he'd said, standing too quickly. "What are you doing here?" "Just a little getaway," she'd replied, her gaze flickering to me before returning to my husband. "I had no idea you two would be here. What a small world." A practiced lie delivered with perfect timing. I'd felt it in my bones. "It's our anniversary," I'd said, reaching for Charles's hand across the table. 15 years. "Congratulations." Her smile had tightened. Charles always did have excellent taste. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in subtext. Every question seemingly innocent, every answer carefully constructed. Charles had explained it was a random booking when I'd questioned him later in our suite, his dismissal so casual it was clearly rehearsed. "You're imagining things, Ellie," he'd said. "We've been divorced for 17 years. You think I plan to run into her here?" Now, standing in our darkened suite with his wallet in my hands, I unfolded the paper I'd found. It was a handwritten schedule. Dates, times, locations. The Marina, 10 a.m. tomorrow. The Hidden Cove, 2 p.m. Thursday. The North Trail, early morning Saturday. My stomach twisted as I matched the schedule against our carefully planned anniversary itinerary. Every time I'd planned a spa treatment for myself, he had a meetup scheduled with her. The cooking class I'd thought would be romantic? He'd claimed a sudden interest in golf. At exactly the time he was meant to meet Rebecca at the resort's garden. I sank onto the chair, still clutching the damning evidence. My mind raced back through the past 6 months. Charles's sudden business trips, the mysterious withdrawals from our joint account that he'd explained away as investments, his renewed interest in our anniversary when I'd suggested we might skip it this year. The entire vacation was a sham. Not our second honeymoon, but a carefully orchestrated opportunity for him to see her while I was distracted by massages and meditation classes I'd booked for myself. I glanced at my sleeping husband, his face relaxed in slumber, untroubled by the betrayal he'd orchestrated. 15 years of marriage reduced to an elaborate cover story for his infidelity. With trembling fingers, I snapped a photo of the schedule with my phone before carefully refolding the paper and returning it exactly as I'd found it. I placed the wallet back in his pants pocket and moved silently to the bathroom, closing the door before turning on the light. I stared at my reflection, the woman who had spent months planning the perfect anniversary trip, who had believed her marriage worth saving. Behind me, through the open bathroom door, I could see our king-sized bed, the rumpled sheets, and the man who had shattered everything with a single piece of paper. Tomorrow I would smile and kiss him good morning. I would pretend excitement about my spa appointment while he played golf. I would begin making plans of my own. Paradise had been interrupted, but Charles wouldn't know that. Not yet. Sleep became impossible. I lay beside Charles for 2 more hours, listening to his peaceful breathing while my mind raced through 15 years of memories, searching for signs I might have missed. At 3 a.m. I slipped out of bed again, this time with purpose rather than for aspirin. Charles's laptop sat on the desk in our suite's living area. The ocean waves provided a rhythmic soundtrack as I carefully opened it, the blue light illuminating my face in the darkness. I knew his password pattern. He rotated between our anniversary date and his mother's birthday, occasionally adding an exclamation point when systems required it. Amateur security for a man with so much to hide. I tried our anniversary first. 06082009. Nothing. His mother's birthday with an exclamation point. 11251955. The screen unlocked, revealing dozens of open browser tabs. Charles had always been disorganized with his digital life, a trait I'd found endearing until now. His email was still logged in. I clicked through folders, scanning for Rebecca's name, finding nothing until I checked his archived items. There they were, dozens of exchanges dating back 8 months, each message more intimate than the last. Their correspondence revealed a relationship that had rekindled during a business conference in Chicago last fall, a conference I'd encouraged him to attend. "Eleanor thinks I'm networking with potential clients," he'd written. "If only she knew the most valuable connection I made was reconnecting with you." My stomach turned as I continued reading. Their initial reminiscing had quickly evolved into planning meetings and eventually this vacation. Charles had suggested the Malibu Coast Resort because I would be easily distracted by the amenities, while they conducted their real business. Their real business. The emails referenced a venture called Horizon Partners, with increasingly specific financial discussions. I opened a new browser tab and searched Charles's bookmarks for banking information. He hadn't bothered hiding his password manager, another sign of his complacency in our marriage. 3 clicks later, I was staring at an account I'd never seen before, a joint business account for Horizon Partners LC, with Charles Harrington and Rebecca Westfield as signatories. The balance, $387,000. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. I recognized those funds. They were from our retirement portfolio. 6 months of strategic reallocations he'd mentioned casually over dinner. "Just moving some investments around for better returns," he'd said. "Nothing to worry about, financial stuff is boring anyway." The memory of that conversation burned now. I'd been preparing quarterly tax documents for my volunteer work with a local nonprofit, work that utilized my accounting background, when he'd made that comment. I'd almost asked for details but stopped when he'd added, "Trust me to handle this, Ellie. You've got enough on your plate." Another memory surfaced. Charles questioning my donation to my sister's medical fundraiser last year. "Are you sure we can afford $5,000 right now? We need to think about our future." All while he was siphoning hundreds of thousands into a secret venture with his ex-wife. I methodically took screenshots of everything, sending them to my personal email account before carefully covering my digital tracks. A forgotten skill from my accounting days returned. The ability to examine financial statements and reconstruct narratives from numbers. The transfers had begun small but grew larger and more frequent, accelerating over the past 3 months. The most recent transfer had been just 2 days before our trip. $50,000 moved from our joint investment account to Horizon Partners. I followed the money trail backwards, noting how Charles had questioned my modest clothing purchases last month while simultaneously transferring $75,000 to the account he shared with Rebecca. As dawn approached, I closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it and returned to bed, lying motionless beside the stranger I'd married. I watched the promised sunrise alone, its beauty lost on me as I planned my next moves. When Charles finally stirred around 8, I was already showered and dressed in the floral sundress he'd complimented yesterday. I'd applied makeup carefully to hide my sleepless night. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, reaching for me. "Sleep well." "Like a dream," I lied, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "I ordered breakfast on the balcony. The view is incredible." While he showered, I made 2 crucial calls from the balcony. First to our family lawyer Martin back in Boston, keeping my voice low and steady as I explained the situation. Martin had handled my family's legal matters for decades. Charles had always found him unnecessarily cautious, and had pushed for his college roommate to handle our affairs instead. Now I understood why. "Don't confront him yet," Martin advised. "Forward everything you found. I'll file emergency financial orders this morning to freeze the major accounts." My second call was to my personal banker, Angela, who managed the modest inheritance my grandmother had left me. Charles had repeatedly suggested we consolidate those funds into our joint investments for simplicity, but my grandmother's words had stopped me. "Always keep something that's just yours, Eleanor. Not because you don't trust, but because you must always be able to stand on your own." Angela answered immediately despite the early hour. "I'm putting a security hold on your personal accounts," she said after hearing my abbreviated explanation. "He shouldn't have access, but let's be certain." Between calls, I photographed the paper schedule I'd found in Charles's wallet, along with other documents in his briefcase. Incorporation papers for Horizon Partners that listed both Charles and Rebecca as founding partners. Charles emerged from the bathroom, hair damp and smile bright, completely unaware that I'd discovered his betrayal. He joined me for breakfast, chatting about his golf game scheduled for later. "You don't mind, do you, sweetheart? I know we're supposed to be spending time together, but you'll be at your massage anyway." I smiled and reached for his hand across the table. "Of course not. We have 2 whole weeks here. Plenty of time together." What I didn't say, I now knew exactly where he was going and who he would be meeting. What I didn't show, the devastating knowledge that our 15 years together had culminated in not just emotional betrayal but financial deception that threatened to destroy the life we'd built. As Charles kissed me goodbye an hour later, promising to meet me for a late lunch, I watched him walk away with the confident stride of a man who believed himself clever beyond discovery. He had no idea that while he conducted his business meeting with Rebecca by the marina, I would be setting in motion the collapse of their carefully constructed house of cards. I watched Charles disappear down the winding path toward the marina, waiting until he was completely out of sight before I allowed my carefully constructed smile to fade. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and betrayal as I gathered my composure and prepared for what would be the performance of a lifetime. The beachside restaurant was already filling with the resort's well-heeled guests when I arrived for our scheduled late lunch. I'd chosen a table with a clear view of the entrance and the marina beyond. I wanted to see them approach. My fingers trembled slightly as I ordered a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, something to steady my nerves before the show began. Right on cue, they appeared at the restaurant entrance precisely 30 minutes after our agreed meeting time. Charles looking relaxed in his golf attire, Rebecca laughing at something he'd said. They paused at the host stand and I watched the moment Charles spotted me. His face performed a remarkable transformation, from intimate camaraderie to surprised guilt to manufactured casualness in the span of 3 seconds. "Eleanor." He approached our table with practiced concern. "I'm so sorry I'm late. You'll never believe who I ran into on the back nine." Rebecca followed with an apologetic smile. "I hope you don't mind me crashing your lunch," Charles insisted. "Of course not," I replied, raising my wine glass in greeting. "What a lovely surprise." Again. The waiter appeared, and Charles ordered drinks for himself and Rebecca without consulting either of us about her joining our table. A small but telling gesture. "How was your massage?" Charles asked, his hand covering mine on the table in a display of affection that now felt like another line item in his ledger of deceptions. "Divine," I lied, having cancelled it to make my emergency calls. Though I did have to step out briefly to adjust our spa schedule. They double-booked one of my treatments. Rebecca's eyes darted to Charles momentarily, a glance so quick most would miss it, but I was watching for exactly these moments now. They had plans that my treatments would accommodate, plans now potentially disrupted. Nothing serious, I hope, Charles said, his thumb absently stroking my wrist in a gesture that once would have comforted me. Nothing I couldn't handle, I assured him, letting warmth infuse my voice while my mind calculated each move in this chess game. We accountants are good with scheduling conflicts. Charles chuckled, relaxed by my reference to my former profession. Eleanor was quite the financial wizard before we got married, he told Rebecca, as if she hadn't been the wife before me, as if they hadn't discussed me extensively in their emails. Really? What firm were you with? Rebecca asked, feigning interest while subtly checking her watch. Brightman and Associates. I specialized in forensic accounting, actually. I watched her face carefully as I added, following money trails was my particular talent. A flicker of unease crossed her features, quickly masked by a smile. Fascinating. I always found finance rather dull, personally. The lunch progressed with excruciating pleasantness. 3 actors performing for different audiences. I asked Rebecca about her current work, knowing from their emails exactly what she did but watching her fabricate a story about art gallery consulting that conveniently omitted Horizon Partners. After Rebecca excused herself to take a business call, I leaned toward Charles. She seems nice. I'm glad we've all moved beyond any awkwardness. The relief on his face was palpable. That's what I've always loved about you, Ellie, your maturity. Once lunch concluded and Charles mentioned another golf lesson scheduled for the afternoon, I smiled and suggested he enjoy himself. I have a facial at 3 anyway. Meet for dinner at 7. The moment they departed, I moved quickly. First, a call to our financial advisor Richard, not from our suite but from a secluded spot near the koi pond where I couldn't be overheard. Eleanor, these transfers were never authorized through me, Richard confirmed after I explained what I'd discovered. Charles circumvented our usual protocols. Can you secure what's left? Already implementing emergency measures based on Martin's filing. The joint investment accounts are temporarily frozen pending review for unusual activity. I ended the call and stared at the colorful fish swimming in blissful ignorance below. 15 years ago, I'd been a rising star at Brightman, specializing in identifying financial fraud and tracking hidden assets. Then I'd met Charles at a charity gala. His family's shipping business was expanding and he'd painted dreams of building something together. 6 months after our wedding, when his company needed restructuring, I'd stepped away from my career, temporarily, to help him stabilize the business. Temporary had become permanent. Each time I'd mention returning to work, there was another crisis at his company, another reason I was needed behind the scenes. Eventually, I'd channeled my skills into volunteer work for nonprofits, telling myself it was more fulfilling than corporate accounting. Now I realized how deliberately he'd isolated me from my professional identity, the very skills that would have spotted his deception years earlier. My next stop was the security office, where I requested to speak with the chief of security privately. Thomas Reeves was a former police detective with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Harrington, how can I help you?" he asked once we were seated in his office. I maintained my composure as I explained, "I need to change the access to our suite and secure a separate room under my maiden name, Walsh. It's a sensitive situation involving my husband." His expression remained neutral but understanding flickered in his eyes. "We handle these situations with absolute discretion. May I ask if you're concerned for your safety?" "Not physically," I clarified. "But I need privacy and secure access to my belongings without interference." Within 20 minutes I had key cards to both our original suite and a new room in a different wing of the resort, registered to Eleanor Walsh. Thomas personally escorted me back to the suite, where I knew I had approximately 90 minutes before Charles might return. "Call my direct line if you need anything," Thomas said, handing me his card. "Anything at all." Once alone, I moved with practiced efficiency, selecting essential clothing, toiletries, and the jewelry I'd inherited from my grandmother. I photographed the remaining contents of Charles's briefcase and packed all my crucial documents. The new room would be my command center, but I'd maintain appearances in our suite to prevent Charles from realizing anything had changed. As I transferred the last of my needed items to a resort tote bag, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was not the trusting wife who had arrived yesterday, eager to rekindle a marriage. In her place stood someone with clear eyes and a straight spine, the forensic accountant awakening from a 15-year slumber, ready to unravel the financial web Charles had spun. I checked my watch. Charles would be returning soon from his rendezvous with Rebecca. I made one final sweep of the room, ensuring everything appeared untouched, then shouldered my discreetly packed bag. The invisible strategist was now fully awake, and Charles had no idea the game had changed. He still believed he was playing chess while I was setting up checkers. By the time he realized his mistake, I would be 3 moves ahead with my pieces already in position. I closed the door to our suite and headed toward my new room, my steps light with purpose rather than heavy with betrayal. The time for tears had passed. Now was the time for action. My new room was smaller but offered a serene view of the coastline from a different angle. I placed my grandmother's jewelry box on the dresser, a tangible reminder of her wisdom that was now guiding me through this crisis. After arranging my essential belongings, I opened my laptop and reviewed the evidence I'd compiled so far. The financial trail was damning, but I needed expert confirmation. Martin had texted me a name: Daniel Atwood, a senior forensic accountant at Deloitte who coincidentally was staying at the resort for a financial technology conference. Martin had worked with him on several cases and vouched for his discretion. "He'll meet you at 4:30 in the resort's business center," Martin's message read. "He owes me a favor." I checked my appearance in the mirror, straightening my resort wear and applying a fresh coat of lipstick. The woman who gazed back at me looked composed and professional, no hint of the turmoil beneath the surface. Perfect. The business center was quietly buzzing with conference attendees when I arrived. Daniel Atwood was immediately recognizable, mid-50s, silver-haired, with reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents at a corner table. He stood when I approached, offering a firm handshake. "Mrs. Harrington, Martin briefed me on your situation. Thank you for meeting on such short notice," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. "And please call me Eleanor." I presented him with my evidence: the screenshots, account statements, and transfer records I'd meticulously documented. His expression remained neutral as he reviewed each item, occasionally making notes on his tablet. "This is textbook financial infidelity," he finally said, removing his glasses. "The systematic transfer pattern, the shell company structure, the timing of withdrawals to avoid triggering automatic alerts. Your husband knew exactly what he was doing." "And Rebecca? Based on the incorporation documents, she's not just a participant but an architect. This level of financial engineering suggests premeditation extending back at least a year." He tapped one of the documents. "These particular transfers, disguised as business investments, they're structured to establish plausible deniability if questioned." My suspicions confirmed, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Is there anything I've missed? Any angle they could use to justify this? Daniel's eyes were kind but his words precise. "Eleanor, you've constructed a fortress of evidence. Your background in forensic accounting shows. This is more thorough than what many professionals would compile in weeks, let alone hours." We spent the next 45 minutes reviewing legal strategies and financial safeguards. As our meeting concluded, he handed me his business card. "Call me directly if you encounter any resistance from financial institutions. Martin mentioned your husband has connections in Boston banking circles." "Thank you, Daniel. For everything. One last thing," he added as I stood to leave. "Don't underestimate the emotional impact of what you're doing. Financial battles can be as draining as emotional ones." I nodded, appreciating his concern while knowing he couldn't possibly understand the depths of betrayal I was processing. My next stop was a secluded corner of the resort's garden where I could make secure calls to finalize the protection of my personal assets. My grandmother had left me a modest but significant inheritance: property in Vermont, a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, and several family heirlooms. Charles had repeatedly suggested we fold these assets into our joint holdings for tax efficiency, but I'd always maintain them separately. "Always keep something that's just yours, Eleanor," my grandmother had counseled while showing me her jewelry collection before she passed. "Not because marriage isn't about sharing, but because every woman needs the security of knowing she can stand on her own 2 feet if life takes an unexpected turn." I completed the calls, confirming that my personal accounts were now under additional security protocols and inaccessible to anyone but me. The weight on my shoulders lightened slightly. I had a financial foundation that Charles couldn't touch. Returning to the main building, I approached the concierge desk to arrange for a dinner reservation. Maintaining appearances was crucial. The concierge, Sophia, had assisted with our check-in yesterday in what now felt like another lifetime. "Mrs. Harrington, perfect timing," she said. "I was about to call your room. There's been a special wine delivery for your anniversary dinner tonight." As she stepped away from her desk to retrieve the delivery note, I noticed a photograph tucked into the corner of her workstation. Sophia with a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, both beaming at the camera. "Your daughter?" I asked when she returned. Her expression softened. "Yes, my everything. Emma." Something in her tone resonated with me. "She's beautiful." Sophia hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Mr. Reeves from security mentioned you might need some additional assistance during your stay." My guard instantly rose. "I'm not sure what you mean." 3 years ago I was in a similar situation, she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine with understanding. Different circumstances, same betrayal. This resort was my fresh start afterward. She slid a note across the counter. "If you need anything that wouldn't normally appear on a resort bill, documentation services, secure transportation, local legal contacts, call this number. My sister's firm specializes in helping women in transition." The unexpected alliance brought the first genuine warmth I'd felt since discovering Charles's betrayal. "Thank you, Sophia." Back in my new room, I finalized arrangements for the next day. A flight home was booked under my maiden name for tomorrow afternoon. Martin had arranged for preliminary divorce papers to be prepared, with copies sent to my secure email. The financial protections were in place. And then suddenly the weight of everything crashed down upon me. 15 years of marriage. Countless memories. The future we'd planned. All built on a foundation of lies. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my carefully constructed composure finally crumbling. The tears came in waves. Grief for what I'd thought we had, rage at his calculated deception, fear of the uncertain path ahead. I allowed myself exactly 20 minutes to fall apart completely. Curled on the bed, I released every emotion I'd been controlling since finding that damned paper in his wallet. 20 minutes to mourn the death of my marriage. When the timer on my phone chimed, I rose and washed my face with cold water. In the mirror, I saw reddened eyes but also a clarity that hadn't been there before. For 15 years, Charles had underestimated me, assumed I was too trusting, too focused on our relationship to notice his schemes, too removed from my professional skills to follow his money trail. His fatal error was forgetting who I had been before I became Mrs. Charles Harrington. He'd never truly known Eleanor Walsh, the woman who had tracked down hidden assets worth millions and testified in federal court against financial fraudsters before she was 30. I dressed carefully for dinner, knowing it would be our last evening of pretense. Tomorrow's breakfast would change everything. I selected a resort stationery card and wrote a simple note to be delivered with the breakfast champagne, to 15 years of partnership and absolute honesty. One final check of my preparations, one last review of the evidence organized in my portfolio, and I was ready. Tomorrow Charles and Rebecca would discover what happens when you underestimate a woman who spent a decade finding hidden money before becoming your wife. I straightened my shoulders and headed to meet my husband for dinner, the chess pieces of my counterattack now perfectly positioned on the board. Dinner had been a masterclass in deception, not mine but Charles's. Throughout 5 courses of exquisite cuisine, he'd played the attentive husband, reminiscing about our early years together, toasting to many more decades of happiness. I'd matched his performance, raising my glass to truth and partnership, watching him smile without a hint of irony. When morning came, I woke before dawn, calm and focused. I showered, styled my hair, and chose my outfit with deliberate care, a cream-colored linen dress that conveyed both elegance and authority. I added my grandmother's pearl earrings and the sapphire pendant Charles had given me on our 10th anniversary. Armor of a different kind. A text message from Sophia confirmed my special breakfast arrangements were in place. A second text from Thomas Reeves assured me the car would be waiting at the side entrance as requested. Everything was ready. Charles stirred as I was applying my lipstick. "You're up early," he mumbled, reaching for his phone to check the time. I thought we should have a proper anniversary breakfast, I replied, my voice light. I've reserved a table on the terrace at 9. He hesitated for just a moment, long enough for me to know he was mentally checking his schedule with Rebecca. Perfect, he finally said. Though I do have that golf lesson at 11. I'm sure you'll make it on time. The terrace restaurant overlooked the Pacific, the morning sun transforming the water into a canvas of diamonds. I'd chosen our table strategically, centrally located but with some privacy, visible from the entrance but not too close to other diners. The maitre d' led us to our seats with practiced flourish. The champagne will be served at 9:30 as requested, Mrs. Harrington, he confirmed discreetly. Charles raised an eyebrow. Champagne for breakfast? We're being decadent. It's our anniversary, I reminded him. 15 years deserves something special. We ordered Belgian waffles for him, fruit and yogurt for me. A meal I knew I wouldn't eat. As we waited, Charles checked his watch twice, his fingers tapping an impatient rhythm on the tablecloth. Expecting someone? I asked innocently. Just mindful of that golf lesson, he said, reaching for my hand across the table. Though I hate to cut our breakfast short. Don't worry, I assured him. I've made sure everything is perfectly timed. At precisely 9:28, I excused myself to freshen up, positioning myself near the terrace entrance with a clear view of both our table and the path from the resort. Right on schedule, Rebecca appeared, wearing a sundress and an expression of mild confusion. I intercepted her before she could be seated elsewhere. Rebecca, what perfect timing, I called out, approaching her with a warm smile. Charles and I were just having our anniversary breakfast. You must join us. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh, I wouldn't want to intrude on your celebration. Nonsense, I insisted, taking her arm gently but firmly. After all, we're practically business partners, aren't we? The flash of panic in her eyes was unmistakable, but social conditioning prevailed. She allowed me to guide her to our table, where Charles's face performed another remarkable transformation, shock to alarm to forced pleasure. Look who I ran into, I announced as we reached the table. I invited Rebecca to join our anniversary celebration. A server approached with the champagne I'd ordered, a vintage Dom Perignon that cost more than most people's weekly salary. Perfect timing, I said as he began to pour. We're all here now. Charles's smile became fixed as Rebecca took the seat I'd pulled out for her, directly across from him beside me. How unexpected, he managed. The best surprises always are, I replied, lifting my glass once the server had finished pouring. To partnerships, honesty and consequences. Charles's glass paused halfway to his lips. Consequences. I reached beneath the table for the slim portfolio I'd positioned earlier and placed it on the table between us. Before Rebecca arrived, I wanted to share my anniversary gift to you both. Charles glanced at Rebecca, then back to me. Eleanor, what are you talking about? I opened the portfolio, removing the first document, a printout of their email exchanges. 15 years is the crystal anniversary, but I thought paper would be more appropriate. The color drained from Charles's face as he recognized the emails. Rebecca's champagne glass froze midair. This is just the beginning, I continued, my voice steady. I've compiled quite the collection. Emails, bank statements, incorporation documents for Horizon Partners LLC. I laid each document on the table as I named them. The unauthorized transfers from our retirement accounts. The schedule of your meetings during our second honeymoon. Eleanor, Charles began, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished, I said. While you were playing golf yesterday, or rather meeting with Rebecca by the marina to discuss your next transfer, I was rather busy myself. I withdrew another document. This is a notice of emergency financial action filed yesterday morning. All our joint accounts are frozen pending investigation of unauthorized transfers. Rebecca placed her champagne glass down carefully. Charles, what is she talking about? She doesn't know? I asked, genuine surprise coloring my voice. You didn't tell your business partner that the money you've been funneling to Horizon Partners was taken without authorization? That's securities fraud, Charles. And conspiracy in Rebecca's case once she accepted the funds. The terrace around us continued its morning rhythm. Servers delivering breakfast, glasses clinking, conversations flowing. Our private drama was contained within our bubble of tension. "You're overreacting," Charles said, attempting to regain control. "These were legitimate business investments. Which is why you hid them. Created false documentation? Lied about your meetings." I shook my head. "The forensic accountant who reviewed your transactions yesterday disagrees." Rebecca's composure cracked. "You spoke to an accountant?" "Charles, you said these funds were clean." "They were personal investments," Charles insisted, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself, glancing around at nearby tables. "Eleanor, this isn't the place." "I disagree. This is exactly the place." I removed the final document, the divorce petition Martin had prepared. "Our marriage ends exactly where you chose to destroy it. In public with an audience through calculated deception." Charles reached for the papers, but I slid them back into my portfolio. "Your copy will be formally served next week. I've authorized Martin to cooperate with the Financial Crimes Division if necessary." "You wouldn't," Charles whispered, his face ashen. 15 years. 15 years I devoted to our partnership while you planned your exit strategy." I stood, gathering my portfolio. "I've already moved my inheritance and personal assets beyond your reach. The joint accounts are frozen. Horizon Partners' assets will be next once the fraud investigation begins." Rebecca pushed back from the table. "I had no idea the money wasn't properly transferred." "He told me." "Save it for the deposition," I advised her. "You'll need better lies than that." I glanced at my watch. Perfect timing. "My car is waiting. I have a flight to catch." "You're leaving." Charles stood, panic finally breaking through his composed facade. "Eleanor, we need to discuss this rationally. Whatever you think you've found." "I found exactly what you hid, Charles. Every dollar. Every lie. Every plan you made to abandon our marriage while keeping me in the dark." I closed my portfolio with finality. "You always said I was too trusting. That financial matters were boring to me. You forgot that before I was your wife, I was the accountant who testified against the Brenner investment scheme." I gestured to the waiter. "Please add the breakfast to Mr. Harrington's room charge. Include a generous gratuity. It's their anniversary after all." Charles grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. "You can't just walk away." I met his eyes for the last time, seeing not the man I'd loved but a stranger I'd finally recognized. "I'm not walking away, Charles. I'm walking forward, something I should have done years ago." I gently removed his hand from my arm and left them sitting there, champagne untouched, evidence scattered between them like the ruins of their schemes. My steps were steady as I crossed the terrace, nodding politely to other guests enjoying their breakfasts, oblivious to the destruction I'd left behind me. Thomas Reeves waited by the side entrance with a discreet nod. "Your car is ready, Ms. Walsh." The use of my maiden name felt like reclaiming a part of myself long forgotten. "Thank you, Thomas." As the car pulled away from the Malibu Coast Resort, I didn't look back. Ahead lay uncertainty, legal battles, and the painful process of rebuilding. But I was no longer the woman who had arrived 2 days ago, eager to save a marriage built on lies. That woman was gone. In her place sat Eleanor Walsh, free of illusions and fully awake to her own power. Breakfast, like revenge, was best served cold.